Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first Future of Schools conference hosted by Ashoka University. The theme of the conference is Overcoming the COVID-19 Challenge and Beyond, an appropriate theme for the scenario today because the COVID-19 pandemic has left no aspect of human life untouched, and schools have definitely been among the most affected organizations. Not only were they the first to close down, they are likely to be the last to open up. And in between those 2 points in time, they have to make decisions about evaluations, examinations, the health and safety of students, answering questions from parents, students, teachers, and authorities, dealing with many other uncertainties, and so on. That is where the idea of this conference came from. This is the largest ever virtual conference of the Indian school system. And we are very proud to say that we have at this point 18,000 plus registrations, and we hope to have more than 10,000 people online in the next few minutes. In this context, I would like to thank our partners, Harvard Business School, India Research Center, College Board, TIC, Exceed, Center, the IC3 Movement, and Khan Academy for helping us and spreading the message far and wide. The conference will run on 2 tracks. Track 1 is called Reimagining Education, in which schools will discuss how to resolve the immediate challenges they're facing. And track 2 is called Adaptive Leadership, which will talk about how to emerge from this crisis with lessons which will help to build the school of the future. We are very fortunate to have many eminent speakers delivering keynote addresses, and it is fitting that the first keynote be delivered by someone who oversees school education in India today. The talk is titled COVID-19, Responses and Preparation by the School Education System. And it will be delivered by Ms. Anita Karwal, who is Secretary in the Department of School Education and Literacy, Ministry of Human Resource Development. Ms. Karwal is a Gujarat cadre officer of the 1988 batch IAS. And prior to coming to this role, she was the chairperson of the Central Board of Secondary Education, or CBSE. Welcome, ma'am, to the conference. Thank you for making the time in what must be a very busy schedule. Ma'am? I think Anita ma'am is online. I think she'll take a moment. I'm sure she's caught up with a couple of other things. I have to say that we are very lucky to have her because she's really been in back-to-back meetings. And as you can imagine, this is a very busy time for her. I can also share with you that we already have close to 3,000 people, 2,500 people online. It's going up at a very significant pace. I think we need to pull Anita ma'am out of the commitment that she's probably attending to right now. In a way, it's good because some of the people who are logging in now won't miss anything that she has to say. I do hope everyone's comfortable wherever they are, staying safe. Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. Ma'am, you need to turn on your camera.
I think, I don't have enough bandwidth for the camera. So is it all right if I continue like this?
Yeah, okay.
Let me try. I'm just trying. Fine. Can you see me because I have switched on the camera?
No, ma'am.
Well, shall I go straight to my presentation?
Yeah, ma'am, just see if you can share your screen.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen just now.
Yeah, Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll leave you to now talk to the audience.
Can I be heard? Can I be heard?
No, ma'am. We can hear your, we can see your screen, but we can't hear you.
Okay. Just a minute. I'm just opening my presentation. I'm so sorry for this. Can you see my screen? No?
Yes, we can see your screen. There's a PowerPoint coming up.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So if you can hear me, then I'll start. My video is not coming. I think the bandwidth is pretty low.
Yeah, that's fine, ma'am, because we can hear you.
Okay. Great.
So we can also see your presentation. If you just go into slideshow, we can start. Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Imran. And I'm so sorry for this glitch. Technology has its glitches. And a very good afternoon to all of you. I was noticing there are almost 2,000 people who have joined this this conference today, virtual conference. Well, welcome to all of you, and I hope all of you are keeping safe. What I'm going to present to you today is the response of the School Education Ministry, the Government of India. And I'm also going to intersperse it with the responses of certain state governments because we are constantly in touch with them. So first of all, when this pandemic came in March, at that time, I, as most of you know, was chairperson of the Central Board of Secondary Education, conducting the 10th and 12th board exams. And it just got us in the middle of that. We were not able to conduct the complete exams. We had to close down schools. We had to close down exams. As of today, there are more than 24 crore children in the school education system of India, whether they are in schools affiliated to CBSE or they are in schools of the state governments or private schools in the states. 24 crore children have got affected by this. Now, what we decided when we started working on this area of our response, the first thing we thought of was mental well-being of the children. Now, for the purpose of mental well-being, we noticed that some state governments had been trying to get their teachers to do the counseling for the students. Some state governments were actually getting in touch with parents, etc. We have come out with an initiative which is to be launched possibly next week, which is called Mano Darpan. I'll talk about it later on. And we hope that this initiative is going to help not only the students in the school system, but also the parents and the teachers. The second thing we wanted to focus on was the continuity of the effective learning process. Whether it is online or offline, the process had to continue. The third thing, of course, which is a very big thing these days about e-learning, but we needed to focus on the access to e-learning. You see, equity, technology without equity is something which will not lead to effective learning in all our children. The quality of digital education is something which, we had sort of postponed before the COVID happened. But once this happened, the pandemic came and we realized that whatever we put up there in the digital education universe, it has to be of the highest quality. It has to be engaging, interactive. It has to be able to communicate with the stakeholder. The next thing, of course, is the teacher capacity building. Not only capacity building for undertaking online or digital education or utilizing content online for the purpose of education, but also we felt that we could not miss out on the continuity of teacher capacity building. We had started a program called Nishtha last year, as many of you would be aware, in which face-to-face teacher capacity building in 14 modules for elementary schools, 42 lakh teachers, we had initiated. But we had to again cut it short. We were able to reach only about 18 lakh teachers. So this is another aspect we are focusing on. And of course, the much speculated guidelines for reopening schools with safety and with health precautions. I'll come to each one of these one by one. With regard to Manodarpan, as I mentioned, what we have done is we have prepared the following. As you can see on the slides, there is a website which has a lot of material, audio, video, manuals, posters, frequently asked questions, etc., on various kinds of aspects of mental health and well-being. We have also, we are about to start a toll-free helpline for the country in which students can simply call on that number and get immediately connected to a trained counselor at the other end of the phone, to which the students can talk about their difficulties. So this is something which we had experimented in CBSE, and we had been doing it for a long time, for the past 22 years, and we found the results so good that we decided to extend it to the whole country. So you will shortly, once we launch it, it will be available for all students of India. We have also prepared a national directory of counselors for the first time. It will come on the website as and when it is launched next week. And of course, the next step is preparing an interactive chat platform for students. This is in phase 2 of the Manodarpan launch. Coming to health and wellness further, this is something which we decided early on. You see, the midday meal program is not extended to students during the vacations. But looking at the pandemic and the fact of migration, the fact of employments getting unstable for the parents, we decided to extend the midday meal program even during vacations in the form of direct benefit transfer or in the form of dry rations which are being supplied to the homes of children across India. Now, coming to continuing the learning effectively. Now here we needed to, as I said, focus on devices, on content creation, on calendars, on textbooks. Now here is the context. Let us just look at the numbers. There are 63 million children, 6.3 crore children just in the secondary and higher secondary in India. There are 6.4 crore children just in the middle school. And if you look at the primary, the lower primary part, then you have 12 crore children. Now, we are aware that even when schools and colleges do reopen, there will have to be maintenance of social distancing. There will have to be a lot of precautions to be taken. Therefore, the way learning happens in classrooms is going to change. And there is going to be a lot of adjustments which the teachers and the students will need to make. And this adjustment is something which we cannot guarantee it will happen in 2 days. It may take a little bit of more time for a few children and less time for the others. So this is the context in which we are functioning. Now, what we have done is we are now trying to realign various interventions, the whole learning process, the whole pedagogy that will happen in the classroom, the instructional load, the way the children will be called to school, what happens at the entry and the exit points of the schools, what are the roles of the teachers, the changed roles of the teachers, etc. So we are working on this. And the first thing that we did is we directed all the states and advised them to provide textbooks to the children at their homes right away. So some states did mention to us that printing is not allowed, transportation is not allowed. So we intervened on their behalf to the Ministry of Home Affairs and requested, and we got permission, and states have now been able to print their books, and almost all states have been able to either send it to the last child or are in the process of doing so. Now, this is how we started. So now, though we have various platforms and portals and Swayam Prabha TV and Swayam, etc., we decided to come out with an alternative academic calendar. So now this is a very special calendar. It is available on NCERT website. It looks something like this. This is a calendar which has been made for the first 4 weeks for classes 1 to 12. It is mapped with the learning outcomes, and it has only suggestive activities and themes which have been picked up. E-resources have been linked there, and even if you do not have access to e-resources, there is a guide as to how you can learn this particular topic with the help of resources available at home. So for younger children, of course, parental guidance may be required, but the older children, it is actually activity-based learning. This has been developed in 3 languages. Now, 4 weeks have been developed. We are in the process of developing for the next 8 weeks, and we'll possibly develop it for the whole year and make it available for the whole of India in these 3 languages. And states are, of course, free to translate them. Now, coming to the infrastructure for e-learning. So many of you may be aware, and I think Diksha is going to be spoken about today, Diksha, or the digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing. This is an infrastructure on which we started work more than two and a half years back. And as of today, 29 states and UTs have onboarded onto Diksha. So they have their own verticals on Diksha for grades 1 to 12. And the most important activity that we have done on Diksha is that we have energized textbooks. What do we mean by energized textbooks? I'll just show you. Energized textbooks is nothing but a QR code which is put in every chapter of the textbook and every hard spot of the textbook. And that QR code, when you scan it, it comes alive with videos or audios or animations or tests or assessment practices, etc., which the child requires to understand the given topic. As of today, there are more than 90,000 pieces of content in 15 languages for grades 1 to 12 on Diksha, and 1,900 textbooks of NCERT as well as states have become energized as of today. And Diksha has been seeing a lot of page hits. It has reached 90 crore page hits now, and more than, I think, almost 20 crore scans of the QR codes, etc. And it also became the #1 free educational app in the Android store. In Diksha, what we did is we started something called Vidyadan. So there is an interface on Diksha in which we have invited the country, the organizations in the country, individuals, educationists, people such as yourself, experts in the area of online content, to donate, contribute content to Diksha in slotted boxes, where we have, for example, CBSE has asked for content for grades 1 to 12 in a particular language, particular kind of content. It is all slotted there. All that the people have to do is drop it in that box, and then the content goes to the curator. The curator looks at it and decides whether we want to accept it or not, and then it gets tagged onto the Diksha platform. So this also, I'm very happy to tell you, when CBSE opened Vidyadan for 20 days, more than 2,100 content contributors, organizations, and individuals have nominated themselves for this purpose. Now UP and Assam have opened their Vidyadan. Slowly the states are opening their Vidyadan. So Diksha, as you can see here, these are some newspaper reports. Many of the states are now functioning through Diksha because it's very easy for them. Actually, their books are QR coded. Whatever content they want to show to the child, in the textbook, in the QR code, in the backup, they can change the content, and the child can see a new content every day. In fact, I'm very glad to tell you that states like Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh have actually started teacher training on Diksha, in which they just send a QR code to the teacher on the phone, and the teacher just opens the QR code and starts the training. So this is all based on Diksha. So states like Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Assam, Odisha, they are all focusing on e-content based on Diksha. Madhya Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, as you can see, all this is newspaper cuttings from recent times. Now, we also have another mode of education, digital education, which is the Swayam Prabha TV channels. We have 4 TV channels as of now, but now another 8 have been earmarked looking to this pandemic, and we don't know where it is going. So now, within 6 to 8 months, we will be able to come out with 1 class, 1 channel, and we hope to come out with very good content on that, at least in 2 languages from the center, and then 4 to 5 hours per day will be given to various states to do it in their languages. We are also doing MOOCs courses. So there are several students in the country who are registered on the Open School platform in the NIOS. For them, there is this special content which has been created for grades for secondary and higher secondary, and this is in the MOOCs. These are MOOCs courses. With on air, of course, there is radio, and almost 1 to 2 hours of radio every state has activated, and they are particularly using it for the younger group, for classes 1 to 5, because many of them are actually auditory learners, and it helps because especially if you make the programs very interesting. We are also about to foray into community radios. We are looking at how we will go into this for secondary and higher secondary. And CBSE has done a very interesting experiment, which I have been told by many people has become very useful for the specially abled children. And this is a podcast called Shiksha Vani. And this is for classes 9 to 12. So you can simply go to the Android Play Store, download this free podcast, and start listening to your topics through podcast. So there are expert teachers who simply in 10 to 12 minutes are explaining very complex topics in different subjects. For the differently abled, we are especially wanting to focus. So there is some content which we have been able to prepare through DAISY and also in sign language. We are now structuring the content and creating the taxonomy for it, and we hope to bring it onto the correct platforms very soon. E-textbooks are there, which are available on NCERT in EPUB mode, and more than 370 textbooks are there. And it is very easy to go through these textbooks through the EPUB mode, and they are also flipped textbooks on this website. NROER, you're all aware now, here it is written as 17,500. Now I believe it has crossed 18,500. So there is content in the form of videos, audios, but now we are trying to structure it. We are trying to put a taxonomy to it to make it more user-friendly. So all these stores that we have, now we are trying to basically make it very, very structured with a very good user experience for our students and teachers. Textbooks I have all spoken to you, and I just wanted to mention that almost all states, barring one or two, have energized textbooks now in India, in the state government schools. Now, this is what an energized textbook looks like. So this is Kannada textbook, and this is a mathematics class 5. This is a science textbook from UP. This is Gujarat, mathematics class 6. This is Assam class 9. So you can see the QR code, which is there at the top. And this is what, it is placed at very strategic points for the child to be able to understand the topic. And I wanted to tell you that the content behind the QR code can be downloaded with very little internet for the whole chapter and even for the whole book. Within 8 to 10 minutes, it is possible to download the whole content into the phone and or on the device that the child is using. And then the child can continue to see the content offline. They don't have to frequently go onto the internet for this. Now, coaching is another thing which has been hit very badly by the pandemic. So the ministry has come out with, IIT PAL was already there, but it has been made much more extensive. A lot of new videos and have been added to this. And eAbhyas has started publishing one full test every day for the preparation for JEE and NEET. And this is based on the actual pattern of papers that is there for JEE and NEET. Now, for digital education, I'm not sure if you are aware, but about 2 weeks back, the finance minister of the country announced the PM eVidya program. So because we have such scattered resources, and also, the user experience in many of the resources is not good enough for the child or the teacher to want to actually go through several clicks to look at their resources. So we have decided to unify all our e-efforts under the PM eVidya program. And in this, as I mentioned, aside from Diksha, which is One Nation, One Digital platform, we have Swayam Prabha, one channel per class. We have MOOCs, we have on-air specially content for specially abled, and we have the online coaching, and all will have to flow seamlessly from one to the other. The idea of the unification is that if I can see a content on Diksha, I should be able to see it on Swayam Prabha because I don't have internet and I don't have a device, but I can see the same content on Swayam Prabha, bringing in equity, the much required equity in education, and particularly through digital education. So I spoke about this multimode and integrated access. We have also prepared, we realize cybersecurity is an area which would have to go hand in hand with all this, with children coming online so often. So CBSE has come out with a very good QR coded manual on cybersecurity. I urge you to go to their website and have a look at it. Developing digital classrooms. Now, as of now, every school, every state government, every board, they are having their own system of developing digital classrooms. Um, to the state governments, of course, the government of India is providing a lot of funding for making digital classrooms. But the tool for the purpose of digital classrooms is something we are looking at, and probably the Ministry of Information and Technology is experimenting and piloting on the tool. We hope to be able to use it at a later date. Uh, the importance in e-content, of course, is of languages. So unless the child, we have the content in the language of the child, it is not a useful content. So this is something we are paying a lot of focus on, and we are hand-holding the states to prepare their own content in their own languages or to translate content already available on Diksha. The beauty of Diksha is the content prepared by one state can be tagged to the QR code of another state by simply changing the language. We are also trying to develop a framework for enhanced learning within the classroom and outside the classroom, because now there will be a lot of home schooling, for some time. And there is a possibility of blended schooling also, a bit at home and a bit at school. So we need to prepare a framework for that. We are also coming out with SOPs for online and digital education. There has been an upsurge in this and also an uproar on the way some schools are doing this. Some schools have simply replicated the timetable of the school, and the child is sitting in front of the device for 7 to 8 hours. And there is often this cry that there's only one device in the household, and you can't give it for schooling. And we've had some unfortunate incidents also. So we are trying to come out with these guidelines very soon. But these will come out after the school safety guidelines come in. So the Safe School Operation Guidelines are actually ready. We are doing some consultation with the states, and there is some kind of a rumor going on that these guidelines are actually going to, tell the date of school reopening. No, there is no such thing, I must clarify, because school reopening dates are entirely within the purview of the state governments and the UTs. They have to decide depending on the local situation. The center does not intervene in this. We are only trying to prepare guidelines for sanitation and social distancing and how to do classroom transactions with all these guidelines. Similarly, I mentioned to you about the online and digital education. So this is all that I had to say. Of course, there's a lot of other things which are being done, but given the timelines that I was given, I thought, I'll briefly touch on some of the important things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I think given the limited time that you had, it was a very comprehensive picture of everything which is being done. And in fact, you answered many of the questions that people were putting up in the boxes even before um, you could address those aspects. Thank you very much for sparing time for us, ma'am. Looks like there is a lot of effort going into imparting education in this difficult time. Of course, the beginning of the presentation itself told us that there are difficulties that people are facing with technology and infrastructure. So let's hope that we all come out of this using all the things that you've described and education proceeds apace. For all the people who had questions, I think ma'am has answered a lot of them. And obviously, if we were to try and answer all those questions, ma'am may have to spend the whole day here, which I think is going to be difficult. So many of these topics are going to be discussed over the course of the conference. So I think we will now relieve you, ma'am, to go back to
Thank you so much,
the
Imran.
things that you had told us. Thank you very much for sparing time for us.
Thank you.
And,
Imran, I look forward to some kind of, documentation and
yes, ma'am,
any
absolutely.
recommendations. I really look forward to good ideas from this group. It's
Yes,
4,000 now. I can see the number of participants.
actually, ma'am, we also have quite a few people on YouTube and Facebook. So there's a very big body of thinking on the topic, and we will definitely share the proceedings with you, ma'am. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all.
So that was actually a great start. It really helps to know that the government has already taken so many steps, keeping in view the restrictions that people are facing in large parts of the country, keeping the students and their welfare in mind. Our next session, there are two sessions actually. On track 2, a session which flows very well from this talk, is adapting to a COVID world, impact on the school ecosystem. And this is a session which will have school leaders and principals discussing the ways in which schools will adapt their functioning in the new scenario. And that session is going to be moderated by Mr. Ganesh Kohli, founder of the IC3 movement. To go to track 2, there is a link which is available in the chat. The link is also mentioned on the screen. If I may request people to just go to track 2, the ones who are looking to attend that talk. On this track where we are, our next session is titled Successfully Reopening Schools and Beyond. And the talk will be delivered by Professor John Kim of Harvard Business School. The moderator for the session is Ms. Sujata Sen, who is CEO of Future Hope, an organization that's been working with street and slum children for over 33 years, running 6 homes, a K-12 school, and a skills training center. Prior to this, Sujata was Director East India of the British Council and Director British Council Management Services, a company providing HR and IT solutions for the British Council globally. At the British Council, the span of her work included education, examination services, the arts, and English teaching. While at the British Council, she was a trustee of Future Hope, and she subsequently left that to join the NGO full-time. Thank you, Sujata, for agreeing to be our moderator. And over to you. Sujata, we need your camera on. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ali Imran. Thank you for inviting me. And I'd like to congratulate Ashoka University and all your partners for taking this initiative to organize this conference. And it really shows leadership in the education sector. So many congratulations for hosting this event. And the way that your team has been working for around the clock for the last few days really shows the quality that you have in this university. Today's session, this first session, is about successfully reopening schools and beyond, a question that is vexing, I know, all of us who are listening and who are in any way connecting to education, because the lockdown is the lockdown and we just don't know and we are confused individuals. But we do have to think about how we reopen and give access to our children. On education, the face-to-face learning that happens with our teachers. And to make that first presentation will be Professor Kim Jong, who is a senior lecturer in the General Management Unit of the Harvard Business School. Kim created and teaches the second-year course, Transforming Education Through Social Entrepreneurship, which explores how social entrepreneurs are adapting the disciplines of management as well as technology-driven tools such as personalization algorithms, online education platforms, and artificial intelligence and machine learning tools to deliver pattern-breaking change in education that can be scaled and sustained. Kim also serves as the co-chair of the Public Education Leadership Project, a joint project of Harvard Business School and Harvard Graduate School of Education. He is the founding editor of the District Management Journal, a publication which provides actionable insights related to leading and managing public school districts. Mr. Kim received an AB with honors from Harvard College and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. And this session, it's about ensuring that schools reopen successfully and what innovation they will require and what kind of approach it has to be, of course, an agile approach. And will schools look the same in the future after the pandemic? Over to you, Kim.
So, good afternoon. Just so delighted to be here. Can you hear me all okay, Sujata?
Yes,
okay.
I can.
Okay, great. I'm gonna assume that it's working. So I'm joining you from the Boston area in the United States. So good afternoon. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I just also want to extend my congratulations and gratitude and thanks to the Ashoka University and the entire staff They've made this entire process very easy, and I know that it took a lot of work behind the scenes. So this morning, what I want to do, this afternoon, what I want to do is spend about 20-25 minutes providing a talk, and then I think we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for some questions that may come from the people who are joining us today. And as you said, I want to talk a little bit about how do you actually go about restarting schools, as well as what are the implications beyond that. So I am going to share my screen so that I want to make sure that you can see my screen. Okay. Unless I hear from you, I'm going to assume that you can see my screen. So, you know, when you think about the process of reopening schools, that actually happened for all of you on March 25th. It was really the day that it actually closed. And for us in the United States, it started a little bit later, but it also ended a little bit later too. So what I want to do is take you through what happened, what are the challenges, how do we go about reopening, and what are the implications. So back in March 22nd, this is a time of spring break in the United States, and I was right in the middle of it. I kind of felt like that with the pandemic, perhaps this was something that would result in an extra week of spring break or something like that. And as you can see from this map, blue are the states in the United States where the governors had ordered a closed lockdown, a shelter in place. So you can see this map. There's only really a handful of states and schools that have closed. Of course, on March 25th, all of India went into lockdown. And for the United States, that happened on April 3rd. Only the gray states didn't have a non-essential business closure, but it was a remarkable convergence and agreement that all 50 million students in our public school system in the United States must now stay home. And it was a remarkable display of agreement based on the pandemic. Now, the schools are opening again. The states are opening. We're in summer break, but there's a real divergence of opinion. We have one group of parents and family members and community members who are basically saying, we don't want to comply with the rules. Why can't we just go back to the way they are? And then we have another group of people who are saying, I don't feel safe. How can we go back in without masks and without gloves? And so what I want to really talk about is what are the 5 key challenges to reopening schools successfully? And I know that all of you are probably thinking about that. First and foremost, this is a public health challenge. And because so many information remains unknown about this or changing, it makes it very difficult. Number 2, there's a lack of agreement around what this virus does and how long, for example, immunity can last, who gets it, and so on. And so because of it's a public health challenge combined with a lack of knowledge and lack of agreement, decisions are becoming political as opposed to being scientific. And then third, there's a real lack of time. As I mentioned, in the United States right now, this is the summer break time, so schools are finishing up, they're doing virtual graduations, but right away, in about 2 or 3 months, they must restart again, and the guidance is, like I said, there's a lack of agreement, it's politicized, and the public health information is changing all the time. Number 4, whatever decisions that people come up with, it will be scrutinized and second-guessed. Mainly because I think because it's a political decision, it's not a scientific decision. School leaders, school district leaders are under an immense amount of pressure to make the right decision, and whatever decision they make will be second-guessed. Now, if these 4 things weren't challenging enough, lastly, the circumstances keep changing. Policy keeps changing. The medical policy, medical information about the virus also keeps changing. And so it's very difficult for schools and school districts to react to this. So given these 5 key challenges, what should the strategy be? And if you take nothing away from this talk, it's the following few ideas that I'm going to share with you. Number 1, when you think about the traditional approach to planning in schools, we have taken what's called a linear approach, Typically, there's a problem or an opportunity or a challenge, and we take a 12 to 18-month view on how to actually bring about that change. You form teams, often hierarchical teams, with somebody senior, junior, and mid-level in there. You do a lot of research. You want to prove it before trying it out. You develop comprehensive plans with specifications. You may want to pilot it, test it before you actually implement and roll it out all over the place. And then you get feedback, and then you say you're going to change it later. The motto here is cover all bases. I think given the challenges I shared with you, I'm going to recommend that you try this approach. It's really called an agile, innovative approach. It's rapid, iterative cycles. Form non-hierarchical teams, meaning identify people who really understand the problem regardless of their position so that they can actually provide granular specific data. Be ready to respond to changing circumstances and information. Get feedback constantly, and then focus on that improvement quickly as opposed to taking a long time. The motto here is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The best example I can come up with is if you remember back in the 90s, Microsoft had this Windows that came out 93, 95, and 98. It almost came out like fine vintages of wine. Every few years, they would come out with a new version versus what's on your phone right now. It's really an app store. Every day, your app gets updated based on usage and feedback. And so the idea here, the core idea is as you're thinking about restarting schools, don't wait to create Windows 95. Think of it as creating an app that gets updated almost daily. What this means is that you're going to have to invent a plan for the school reopening. There's nothing out there that you can just use. You're going to have to validate that plan with your experience, with each other, against best research. You want to monitor and modify that plan and do this cycle over and over again. Way you're going to do this, here's the framework that I've developed. You want to create 5 teams. The first team should be focused exclusively on the instructional core and social emotional learning. This is the relationship between the student, the teacher, the curriculum. It involves things like school schedules and staff schedules. Think about ways to not only remediate, but also capture the hearts and minds of students. The second team, second group, should be all focused on operations, technology issues, facility, hygiene, maintenance, food service, transportation, so many details there. Third is the stakeholder engagement and communication. If nothing else, this pandemic has demonstrated how important schools are to our communities, our economy, and of course, above all, to students. And we just heard about equity in education. So think about students and parents and communicating with them constantly. 4 are the resources, budget, time, people. Think about not only in terms of money, but how you're using your people and time and facilities. If you increase group size, you can actually increase your resources. So create 4 teams, those non-hierarchical teams with people who understand how to make change there and make recommendations. And then I recommend that you have a steering committee, number 5, that focus exclusively on 2 things, 2 issues. One is there coherence across these different parts? And are you addressing issues around equity for students and your families? And in addition to that, you really got to think about this scenario planning because it's likely based on healthcare challenges that some students are going to be in remote learning, modified learning, and maybe most likely cases that there's hybrid and blended learning of those 2. And you may have to pivot, change from one to the next and back and forth. So once again, be an app, not Windows 95, because you're going to have to change on a constant basis. Second idea is that you should work in groups. You know more together than alone. And so rather than just working alone and forming these groups, I recommend that you create regional working groups where your teams on instructional core can actually work with others in your area. It can be done remotely. It does not have to be done in person. Operation. This is so that you can share ideas, get creative ideas, consider them, accept them or reject them, but you have actually had a chance to think about it. Third is making sure that you have coherence across all of your different plans. That means you got to focus on what does the instructional point, right in the middle there, what does the experience of the student and the teacher and the curriculum, the content feel like? What is really your strategy? And make sure that your systems, your structure, your resources, your stakeholders, and your culture all fit together so that you can create a cohesive plan that meets the changing environment in which you're going to be doing. This is the most important work, I think, for our society right now. And I'm so grateful and appreciative for all of you for doing this work. But it's going to require that you be innovative and be agile. Given the incredible disruption and change of the pandemic, I want to share with you my 5 key implications and what the future of school may look like given this. First, as strange it may sound, I believe that there's going to be more innovation and more creativity and more experimentation. Now that we've actually closed schools, and it's just a global phenomenon where everyone closed schools, it's no longer going to be just this. This is a carving from thousands of years ago, and you see that very little has changed in many classrooms today. You got the teacher in the middle, you got the students, you got the scroll, which is the curriculum, and that is the instructional core. I believe that with all the changes that have been brought on by the pandemic, there's going to be a lot of innovations in there. Innovations are going to look like students are now going to have greater self-direction. They've been asked by staying at home to actually have agency, take different initiatives for themselves, and there's going to be different ways that they learn, whether it's by reading or by computers or by visual or audio. Content, given the amount of time that people have spent at home, it has actually collapsed the assessment and the instruction together. There are new standards, and the focus is not on how many hours and minutes that you spent in the classroom, is did you learn it? And that's a competency-based model. And then for the teacher, it's really been, because the teacher can't be in front of the class all day long, they have to play a role more of a mentor and really trust the algorithm that's coming out of computers and other forms. So I believe that restarting schools will encourage experimentation, innovation. This is going to be an exciting period despite the challenges, and it's really up to all of us to take advantage of it. Second, I think there's going to be greater level of personalized learning. I think many of you are familiar with Benjamin Bloom's. He was an educational psychologist that did this experiment in the 1980s at the 2 Sigma. The first experiment was he took 30 students and taught them in a traditional way. And he got a bell curve of summative achievement scores. Some students did really well, some students didn't do so well. Second experiment, what he did was he took those 30 students and did what he called mastery learning. He identified the standards that he wanted to teach, and over the period of every couple of weeks, he would test and reteach and make sure that students understood the concepts. He got a 1 sigma improvement, 1 standard deviation improvement. Finally, he did something called a tutorial, which was 1-to-1. He got every student had either a teacher or tutor and basically personalized the education for them. He got a 2 sigma improvement. Of course, the challenge here is that he needed 30 people or 30 times more time to do it. But this can actually be done now through synchronous and asynchronous learning. If you think about it, let's look at the teachers who are really good at explaining complicated concepts and provide them the opportunity to record themselves through video or audio, and that students can then hear that asynchronously. Then repurpose the teachers so that they can then help on a synchronous basis like that 1-to-1. We have this option now. It's actually because the pandemic broke the bounds of the traditional 4 walls to a classroom and the number of days you have to go and number of periods you have to sit in. We actually have this opportunity to think about synchronous and asynchronous learning that can lead to greater personalization, I believe that remote and hybrid learning is going to increase personalization in the future. Number three, it's also related to that, is that the teacher's role will change. If you think about the traditional teacher's role, we take the teacher because we choose teachers, we identify teachers who have really strong content knowledge at the top of that upside down period. She or he must know the content really well, be able to analyze it, put it together, curate it, tutor it. And really at the bottom there is this notion of the teacher should understand the students well enough to be able to coach and support them and encourage them. What we really want, though, if you think about it, is that if the teacher can really do a great job on coaching and facilitating and mentoring students, is there a way for us to deliver that content through technology or something else? In fact, technology is a really good way to deliver information. Technology is a very poor way of delivering coaching and mentoring. In fact, there is a school system, it's a charter school network in California that has developed this system. Their teachers primarily their focus, of course, they understand the content that they're part of, their teaching, but their real focus is on coaching and facilitating and mentoring. And then they combine that with a technology system that was designed and built with the help of Facebook engineers that provide the content analysis and feedback. By combining these two, personalizing content, and then focusing and adapting that delivery, teachers' role will and need to be changed, and it's going to help schools and students. Number four, parents' role will change. Especially in the United States, where 90% of the students go to a public school, and parents trust the schools to do that. All of a sudden, this is a survey that came out. Parents are now in the classroom. All of a sudden, for the first time, they're seeing what is being taught and how it's being taught because the students stayed home. And in this survey, about 2/3 of the parents are basically saying, boy, I'm somewhat concerned or very concerned with what is being taught and how it's being taught. Of course, in India, where nearly 50% of the families send their kids to a non-public school, parents are already very engaged and involved, but I believe that parents will become even better consumers of school and educational services. What this means is that they will focus on what is best for my child. How are the teachers providing that? Is this the best fit? And there will be a greater level of choice, accountability, and information that's demanded. Finally, the last implication for this is that how we measure and define performance will change. Up to this time, I think there's an incredible focus on standardized tests, math, reading, science, and I think this is particularly true in India. But I think what we have also learned is that when students are at home and the parents are being with them, that we learned that they really need a lot of social, emotional, and behavioral supports and strengths. They need to understand self-direction. What are their leadership and adaptability? This has really challenged students. Are they figuring out how to be creative and critical thinkers and their communication and collaboration skills now that they are actually confined to their house? And how are they consuming information? All of this, in some ways, there's been trauma, been difficult for students, but at the same time, I think it's raised our eyes and focus on how important this is for students to be successful in the future. In fact, in the United States, a big news came out during the pandemic. The UC system, the flagship university being Berkeley, essentially said they will end the use of SAT and ACT in admissions, which is a big deal, mainly because they don't think that standardized test is a good measure of talent and future success. And I think this is a movement that will continue beyond just UC. So changes in how we measure performance will also change higher education. So in summary, restarting schools is an incredibly important work. Encourage you to be agile. It will encourage experimentation. Number two, remote and hybrid learning can increase personalization. Teachers' role will change. parents will become even better consumers of education, and changes to how we measure performance will also change higher education. Thank you so much, and I will stop sharing my slide, and I'm happy to take some questions or go more deeply into any topic.
Thank you, Professor Kim. You really churned my mind, as you would have done with the others. You summed it up very beautifully at the end. So essentially, you are saying it's a public health challenge. Nobody understands this virus, and that we will have to be innovative. And there is no widely accepted framework for restarting schools. And this will require innovation, personalized learning, the teacher's role changes from being a content delivery person to a coach and a mentor, and that there will have to be new standards, new ways of measuring, and the parents' role comes in a very big way, because parents are seeing every day what's happening to their children being taught in schools. Yeah, so there are quite a few questions. So let's see how many we can do in the time that we have. Let me start with some of them. The first question is, and I think this is a common question that will come up in every forum when you're talking about reopening schools. How do you ensure safety and social distancing when you reopen school? It's a simple question, but a big one for teachers and parents.
So I think it's going to require trade-offs. For example, because so much of social distancing and health safety is dependent on having enough space. The focus, for example, in the United States is they want to bring younger children, kindergarten through third grade or maybe even through fifth grade, back to school using all the buildings that are available, and then having older children continue to do remote learning. That's one idea. The second idea is really focusing on scheduling. In fact, I do a lot of work with scheduling. Can you actually have students come in the morning and in the afternoon? There's no way to actually bring everybody back without de-densifying. That's a word that I think we have invented, but reducing the number of people in the building. And so people are coming up with creative ways to use time and space very differently. But that's the biggest challenge from a facility standpoint.
Okay, so there's one question coming up, and that's a big one. Can you give us an idea or elaborate more about standardized tests and their role in evaluating a student's performance, especially in India, when the education system is primarily based on assessment and evaluation? And with so much time lost, how do we ensure fair examination and grading?
Yeah, so I think worldwide, standardized tests plays a very, very important role. So I don't want anyone to walk away from my talk this afternoon thinking that I don't believe in standardized tests. I think they're very important. However, it's not sufficient. And I think that there is a movement around the world, around the country, especially in the US, and European countries have been there before, and even other places where it essentially says standardized tests is not a great predictor of how well people can do in future life. So these 21st century standards, the things that I showed on the screen in terms of creativity and collaboration skills and communication skills, people are recognizing that that's incredibly important. So I always provide the advice. You want students to be able to do math, science, reading, because that's the foundation. But that's not enough. It's not sufficient. We have to have all these other things as well. I think the policymakers around the world have been providing in the short run, the ability to waive those requirements or relax those requirements. But in the long run, they're not going to do that. We shouldn't do that. in the long run, I think the educators, many of them who are probably joining us this afternoon, really have to focus, and parents have to focus on, can we actually teach students beyond the standardized tests? It's not a good predictor. Standardized test is a great predictor to be able to answer questions, but not the best predictor when it comes to things like talent, because it's highly correlated with, for example, wealth and time spent on practice as opposed to other types of talent. And that's why UC system is essentially saying they're not going to use that, and other people are following suit.
Yeah. So again, a simple question, but a very deep one. And it is again about parents. How can parents who are going to have a much greater role now in the education of their children, how can they ensure a balance of screen time and creativity and other crucial skills in their children, which come from social interaction in classrooms and on the playground?
Yeah, I think all these are such great questions, and I think we should probably have a conference on each one of them. Because they're such, I think, simple but very difficult and challenging and important questions. I think the fundamental thing that I always come back to is parents need to understand their children, like what they need. I have two daughters, and I think my two daughters, what they need and how they go about fulfilling their educational needs and social needs are so different. And fundamentally, there's no substitute for parents and guardians to understand their children well. I'd say in my research and studies of different educational systems, especially in Asia, India, China, there's a real focus on what happens in the school and after school. But parents can be empowered to play a really important role with children beyond just the academic content. They can play all sorts of role in encouraging them through social interactions, creativity, and all that. And I think it's more important now, given the lack of time to be with other children. So I would say, number one, parents being really more involved beyond just grades and academic performance in the development of the child. It's an incredible gift that we have been given in some ways, because we have to be at home with our children. And this is an opportunity that we really should take advantage of.
Thank you. I also liked the statement that you made very quickly in passing in your presentation, that it's an exciting time. And that gives a little bit of cheer to all of us who are sometimes in depression about this not being an exciting time. Another very simple but I think a very important question is we are looking for students to be well-rounded, academics and extracurricular and everything, all of that, a well-rounded personality. And do you also suggest we will be able to pay attention to extracurricular and outdoors and sports and make it an all-round kind of opportunity for our children?
Yeah, I absolutely do. It's always interesting. As some of you may know, I wrote a case study on Baiju a few years ago, and he told me that when he was growing up, he actually spent a lot of time playing cricket. And I think that's probably why he sponsors a cricket team now, and he spent a lot of time in sports. And he says, I learned so much about teamwork and everything else. And he said, I learned a lot about math going to cricket matches, because he would count things out the window. And I thought that was a really good lesson, that these are not separate. It's not, we don't have education in this box and extracurricular in this box, and the challenge isn't trying to balance the box. It's really, the challenge here is how can you actually combine those boxes so that whatever you're interested in, whether it's art, music, education, sports, that can be an educational opportunity and encourages the creativity of students all around. So if I had a point of view on that, it would be try to combine them and as much as you can. I think one of the problems and the challenges in the educational system is that we have actually segmented it. This is math, this is reading, this is science, and in fact the world is more holistic than that, more integrated.
Okay, so the next question for you is, can you elaborate a little bit on the traditional approach versus the uh, innovative approach?
Oh, yes. So the traditional approach was very much based on, we have a problem, and let's put a group of people together and let's solve that problem, and we're going to have a certain amount of planning. And so, as I gave you an example, Microsoft, when they built Windows, they literally had thousands of computer programmers working on a plan, one plan that was oftentimes dictated by a leader who was in charge of Windows and said, okay, we have collected all this feedback, we have all these requirements that we have to build, here's the time frame, you do this part, I do this part, and we're going to continue. And then once we finish all of our requirements, technical requirements and marketing requirements, then we'll release it. So the idea is that at the end of this, that you're going to release something as close to perfect as you know it then. Of course, people understood that they have to upgrade and every time as technology changes or circumstances change. If you think about the apps on a smartphone today, they change constantly. Every day I look at my phone and I say, oh my goodness, I updated all my apps yesterday, and there's another little dot that says, 30 apps need to be updated. And it's because the idea is when we release an app, there's going to be problems. We know that. But we're going to get real-time feedback so that we can prioritize on what we're going to update and change, as opposed to make everything perfect before we release it. And this means that the power and the information is more to the consumer, the user, than the builder. And so if you think about it in the context of the education and reopening schools, what we're really saying is we can sit in our rooms right now and try to determine what's most important for parents when they come back to school and kids. But we don't actually know because we haven't really talked to them and interacted. So my advice is create the best guess, take the best guess, and then see what happens. And I think parents and students and staff will actually give you the information on how to adjust and be prepared to adjust, because what you release is not perfect, but that's part of the strategy.
Okay, your next question, and this one interests me also a lot. And this question has come up actually from some of our viewers and listeners. And this is about, how does a teacher become a coach and a mentor and only then a content delivery person? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think it's once again, so I think great teachers today probably do that already. So this is to say that really great teachers who spend an enormous amount of time, more than what they probably are required to do this today. They prepare their lesson plans, they understand the content, and they become coaches and mentors to their students. But there are also many more teachers that are coming up in the ranks. And if you think about the fact that, especially in the United States, where we have very specific certification requirements, those certification requirements measure time and classroom management skills, experience, and content. They don't actually measure things like, are you really good at mentoring, encouraging kids, inspiring kids, and things of that nature. In fact, we probably all have people in our lives that are really good at that are not classroom teachers. And computers, on the other hand, technology is incredibly good at delivering information in a personalized way. So what I'm really saying is, we should expand the definition of teacher. Let's not think of the teacher as the person who understands content and knowledge, but let's think about the teacher as someone who can inspire and encourage. And then now, by broadening that definition, many more people can be teachers. Technology is phenomenal at delivering content. Technology is horrible at inspiring and encouraging students. And so let's combine those two. That's all I'm really saying. Let's let people who are good at inspiring, let's let them do that. Let's let technology good at delivering content. Let's let that do that. Combine it, and we have a really making of a great system.
I really love that. I love that answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been seeing that many countries have opened their schools and they've had to quarantine their teachers and their students again. Is it a good time, the right time, or what is the right time to open a school?
Well, I think in general, one of the things that's just been remarkable about closure of schools is that we think about this as they impacting students and families, but we know that it also impacts the community, the economy. People can't go back to work, especially in the U.S. where students need to be in school. Young children have to be in school before they can go back to, parents can go back to work. So I think in that sense, we need to open schools as soon as it is safe to do so. So I'm for reopening and restarting schools, but we have to be done safely. And I think the challenge there to doing it safely is around not only the health of the students, but also the health of staff, who are much more, I think, susceptible to the virus. So, for example, I think in the U.S., everybody is going to restart schools as they were going to do. The question is, what form will it take? Will it be in person? Will it be online, remote, some combination? And so I think the simple answer is we should start school on schedule. How it gets started, I think, is up to individual circumstances of that region, healthcare challenge, and you have to be ready to change how you're delivering your educational, the schooling based on that circumstance.
Okay, so all of us have gone online, and some, of course, haven't been able to go online. How can we as teachers reach or provide quality education to those students who are unable to have access to internet or virtual means? Because if we don't do that, we leave out almost half the student population in the world. And Tim Berners-Lee, in fact, has written about this morning in The Guardian. So how do we do it? What are the possible?
Yeah, and it's not just not India. In the U.S., we've had the equity issues around internet access, technology access, device access has been very glaring in a country even like the U.S. I work with the Los Angeles Unified School District, and about 20-30% of the students didn't really have access to these devices. So, of course, they went out and bought many of them, but that's not really a solution, a long-term solution. I think this is really a challenge. I do think about the fact that I think internet access and technology access should be something more similar to water and power and heat. That this is something that is a utility that should be provided to all families, given it's not just the pandemic, but because of the access to information and news and important services, or so much of it is delivered by the internet. So I think we need to do that as a really a governmental policy, really be thinking about internet access in a similar way that we think about water and power. But of course, not everybody has that either. And then the second thing I think we can do is, before the internet, there was these things called correspondence schools and paper-based. And I saw the previous presentation where there's a lot of work to trying to figure out, is there different ways to deliver it, whether it's by radio or by paper. I think the short run, that's the best we can do to do that. I think in the long run, we have to address this situation about technology access.
Yeah, and of course, with technology, you have another problem, and that's about privacy issues. Zoom is not secure, so-and-so platform is more secure, etc., etc. How do we actually approach the privacy issues when we have gone online?
Yeah, I think this is a huge issue, and one that is incredibly has been a big issue in the U.S. as well. There's been real efforts around privacy issues around that. But fundamentally, I think this is where I think policy makers and government agencies can really play an important role. This is where I think government can play an incredibly important role in terms of data protection and privacy protection. In the US, we have a patchwork approach. There is a guidance called FERPA, federal laws, but really it's left up to the individual local entities to actually execute those. And in general, I think that there's a heightened awareness of the importance of that. I think we can do a lot more on that part to do that. Fundamentally, we don't need a lot of data in order to deliver instructional content. If you are thinking about what I just said about asynchronous and synchronous. So I think being smart about where you actually need specific personally identifiable information and where you don't is going to be something that I think as a sector we have to spend a lot more time on.
Right. Okay, there is a question about standard operating procedures about opening the school, and in your presentation you did address it in a way saying that there is no fixed or widely accepted framework. Do you want to say a little bit about innovation again? Something more that you would like to add?
Yeah, no, I think this is fundamentally, you're not going to find something from somewhere else that says this is how you should do it. There's no accepted framework, because this is something that we as a global community is experiencing for the first time in our lifetimes. But that being said, I keep saying that the reopening schools is not starting now. It started on March 25th when schools stopped. When you closed the doors, that was the first day of thinking about how you're going to reopen them. And I would really I would work together. I've been encouraging, I've started these groups of people working together around the United States, bouncing ideas off. This is a classic innovation approach. No ideas are bad ideas. Let's generate lots of ideas and figure out how we can implement some of them. And some really terrific ideas have come from that by people working together. So I would encourage everybody to figure out whether it's by remote or remote across a state or in a more localized region, how can you actually share ideas? It just has to be structured. They just have to structure it so that it's not about everything. So that's why I'm advocating that you structure that conversation around academics, operations, resources, communications, and then have a steering committee around coherence and equity.
Right. Well, the next question is a real teacher question. And this is, this says, assessments and lesson delivery needs to be relooked, and it should be more application-based. This could mean a more modern training process for teachers. Even the boards have to redesign and restructure. And can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think there's a real movement afoot to have much more. I think what this question is talking about is a competency-based assessments, and rather than measuring time. I mean, we spend so much effort measuring amount of time that students have to spend before they take the test, as opposed to saying, well, you've mastered that concept, so it's a mastery-based, and let's move on. And I think the assessment is a very important part of an overall systems change. And so what I'm advocating for is really re-looking at our approach to teaching, whether it's the role of the teacher and delivery, because the assessment alone can't make that change. Assessment has to be part of the overall systems and structures of how education is done. But I fundamentally agree with that person's question, which is I think assessments need to change in a way that better measures, talent.
Okay, so we have another question, and this is somewhat touching on the mentoring, coaching question that you answered earlier. But let's go with this question, and it says it's true that technology, with that we are able to deliver on a larger scale to wider audiences. But how can we assure quality over content?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I think I heard a bell. That's why I couldn't hear your
Okay.
question.
Okay. The question is that with technology, we are able to deliver on a large scale to wider audiences, but how can we ensure quality over just content?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think the quality is going to be built into the system. I think that's going to be built in. So, not all technology systems are good. I think there are really good ones out there. There's an organization in the United States called Teach for One that uses a very sophisticated algorithm to figure out what would be personalized for each student. So, yes, I'm not suggesting all technology is good, but that we really got to figure out what the algorithms are for personalizing that.
Thank you, Professor Kim. I think you were able to touch on, very big, deep issues and answer them very simply. Just be innovative, be simple, try to work together with people. Don't always look at hierarchy, distribute leadership. And that's what it is required now at this point. And thank you for putting it across so vividly, so easily, so lucidly. Anything at the end that you would like to say?
I just want to extend my thank you to you. You're a wonderful moderator and host, so thank you for that. I want to just extend my thanks to the entire staff and team at Ashoka and Ashish, especially for inviting me. So, Ashish Darwan, so thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all the educators on the call. You're doing really wonderful and important work.
Thank you, Professor Kim, and thank you to all the participants who have so passionately sent their questions, and of course, they're fully engaged with this. Thank you, Ashoka University, and I'm handing over to you, to Ashoka University.
Thank you, Sujata. Thank you, Professor Kim, for that absolutely wonderful session. I think everyone was enthralled, and I have to tell you that if you were to come to India, I think you'd be mobbed at the airport if you were willing to risk flying. And if there was such a thing as a virtual autograph, I think you would have given about 500 after this session. I think it was just absolutely amazing. Of course, as a parent, I could only groan at the thought of having to do more work to make my children study. But we're doing that already for the last 3 months. And I think it was just incredible. I think we can do a full conference just on the questions that people have put to Professor Kim. So thank you very much, Sujata, as well, for moderating the session. Professor Kim, I think we can relieve you now to go on with your day. And we'll definitely have you back very soon. I can promise you that. Thank you, Sujata. Thank you for helping us with this session. We have a bit of a break at this point before the next session, which is going to be in about 3 minutes. But basically, we'll wait for a couple of minutes more before we start. On track 2, there is a very important session which is going to take place also, which is about the community aspect of this pandemic. The community being not just the school and its staff and teachers and management, but also parents and also students and also the authorities with whom schools interact. And that session will be moderated by someone who has rich and extensive knowledge of having done exactly that. The eminent educationist, Ms. Gauri Ishwaran, will be moderating that. That's at 5:40 p.m. on track 2. So those who are interested in that must head for track 2. On track 1, as you can see, we are going to have a talk about the transition to remote. But like I said, you can take a couple of minutes break and we'll be back soon. Welcome back, everybody, to track one. We are about to start our next talk on this track, which is called A Transition to Remote, Managing the Present and Imagining the Future. It's going to be delivered by Professor Prithviraj Chaudhary, who is an associate professor at the Harvard Business School. And it will be moderated by Dr. Annie Koshi, an educator with more than 30 years of experience. Dr. Koshi is a member of the State Advisory Council Delhi that advises the state on implementation of the provisions of the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act. She is also a trustee of the Pratham Delhi Education Initiative and a member of the Departmental Advisory Board, Department of Education of Groups with Special Needs, NCART. Dr. Koshi received her doctoral degree on the discourse of education, re-examining the concept of inclusion via a study of the narratives of school children and the Indian state. Her undergraduate degrees are from Delhi Sri Ram College and the Central Institute of Education, University of Delhi. She has a master's in English literature from Delhi University and also in educational management from Oxford Brookes, UK. Welcome to the conference, Dr. Koshi. It's wonderful to have you here. I know that you are having some lightning problems with your internet, but hopefully that's been fixed. And we all look forward to having you moderate this session with Professor Chaudhary. Over to you.
Thank you, Ali. Well, if MHRD can have problems with the net, I think we're all forgiven for all that. The session now, a transition to remote, managing the present and imagining the future, is next. And we have Prithviraj Chaudhary, who is the Lumri Family Associate Professor at the Harvard Business School. Prithviraj, as far as since Ali has done so much about qualifications with me, should tell you for all of us principals is true blue chip, comes from IIT, IIM, and then on to Harvard, and is now associate professor, the associate at the Harvard Business School. Interestingly, his work is on something which I, for the first time, heard, the geography of work. And he's going to actually look at this transition that is staring all of us in the face, that of moving from the old to the new, the online, and what does it mean about this geographical mobility, immobility, or flexibility. Prithviraj, so lovely to have you. Thank you so much, and we look forward to listening to you.
Thank you, Dr. Koshi. So let me just share my screen. Thank you again. Thanks, everyone. I'm excited to be here. So I'm not a school educationist. I don't study schools, but I've been doing research on remote work for several years now. So maybe what I'll do is in the first 15 odd minutes, I'll just show you some research findings from what I've been working on. And this is my research with companies, of course. And these companies are in some cases extremely large companies that are thinking about remote work. But there are also a few of these companies which are really, really cutting edge in terms of how they're thinking about remote work. So I'll share some of those findings and best practices. And then what I'll do in the later part of the talk is just try to imagine how we could learn from these lessons in a school system and what the future of school education using remote might be. But you are the experts, I want to say, on how to run schools. So I also want to learn from your questions and your thoughts. So with that, let me jump in. So what I've been studying is this phenomena called work from anywhere. Work from anywhere is a relatively recent remote work phenomena. And the companies practicing this remote work practice are typically smaller companies such as Akamai and Zapier and GitLab. But there's also versions of this work practice in NASA, in the US Department of Agriculture, and the US Patent Office, which I studied in a lot of detail. There are large companies such as Dell, which has also done this. So Dell actually went majority remote this year. And this is all well before the pandemic. So this phenomena is not something that is just starting with the pandemic. But there is a lot of skepticism also if you talk to the global leaders in business. So Marissa Myers at Yahoo, very famously, some of you might remember, pulled back her entire company into the office, saying we need to have face-to-face, we need to have these water cooler discussions for innovation. And then IBM more quietly did the same in 2017. They stopped remote work and said, everyone please come back and let's get physically congregated in one location. One thing I want to say is that work from anywhere is conceptually very different from work from home. So work from home is what we are all experiencing now, and work from home has been around for many, many years, even decades. And in a work from home model, you are working from home like this woman that Nicholas Bloom in a Stanford paper is depicting, but you'd also go to this office once a week or maybe twice a week. So you have that physical association with the office. In work from anywhere, which is something I study, and the patent office, the US Patent Office practiced, you now let people live anywhere. So you don't have to be in Delhi or Bombay and be close to the office. You can go and live in a small town in Madhya Pradesh or West Bengal or Orissa and work for the company. So it is the flexibility to live anywhere. And why would people want to live anywhere? Lots of reasons: to save cost of living, to be close to your parents. Maybe there's a dual career situation that makes this easier, so on and so forth. And that is what Dr. Annie was talking about. In my research, I talk about geographic flexibility, the flexibility to live anywhere. And the first thing that happens to any organization which does geographic flexibility is you save a ton of real estate costs. And that is extremely interesting and important if the company or the organization is in, say, Mumbai or in Tokyo or in Silicon Valley or a very high real estate cost location. What I found with a very rigorous study, which I don't have time to get into, but the paper is on my webpage, is that in the US Patent Office, this practice, work from anywhere, also led to higher productivity to the order of 4.4%. And this is productivity of patent examiners who were doing more with their examinations. We also found that people moved to cheaper to live locations. And there were other benefits, such as older workers moving to more sunshine in places like Florida. Now, of course, what we are experiencing now with this forced working from home is not anything like what you would do with remote work under quote unquote normal circumstances. So I've looked at that also, and the data and the evidence is very preliminary. So in the Chinese context, very quickly, what I find is that, of course, the productivity goes down. There's a dip in productivity. And I find that people are working longer hours with this forced working from home experiment. And when I discuss this with people generally agree that that's been their experience too. So what might happen beyond this COVID-19 shock? So one thing, one project I'm really excited about too, and I'm working with TCS. And TCS is trying to move out of its 4.5 lakh workers, 75% of these workers to a work from anywhere model by 2025. So that's something I'm studying. And of course, the reason I mention this is, TCS is not a startup. It's not only dealing with a few thousand people. So there are lots of implementation challenges to this. And what we'll find collectively will be very helpful for other large organizations trying to do the same. Now, I promised that I'll bring this back to the classroom and the school. So let me share some insights from one particular case study I've written recently, and this is a company called GitLab. So GitLab is a 1,300 person organization, and they have been remote from day one. So they've been all remote from day one. So they don't have any physical offices. Everyone works, including the CEO and the entire C-suite, works from home all over the world. So what are some of these lessons from GitLab which might be helpful for us in this present crisis to manage the present? So this case is once again on my webpage. You can find it easily, but let me share a couple of insights from that case. So the first thing, I found very striking in that setting is how they use asynchronous communication. And many of you probably already know what I'm talking about here. But in a traditional school environment, when you are always talking to students face to face and there is discussion in the classroom, that's wonderful. That's what we do at HPS too. But just given this forced working from home, a lot of the communication and the delivery of material, and it's not only delivery from the teacher to the student, but from the student to the teacher, could also be using asynchronous forms. And this is just one of the Slack channels from GitLab. And maybe some of the schools are already using Slack. Now, the benefit of asynchronous is it cuts through time zones. And that's not a big concern for schools in India, I understand. But the other thing that I'm finding in my research is if you post a question and let people react to it asynchronously, so you don't have to do it real time, face to face, it often leads students, or maybe I've not studied students, but I've seen employees to be more thoughtful. So maybe there's more deep introspection in what people, how they conduct their research or their thinking before they respond. So I would urge you to think about asynchronous communication channels. GitLab also does something fascinating, which is to codify all the knowledge in the organization in a handbook. And this handbook is not written by one person sitting at the top. This is a crowdsourced handbook. So maybe each class or each subject can have its own handbook where the teacher writes some part, some students write some part, and maybe this can be across the classes. So not only for one class, so maybe class 5, 6, 7, 8. And people are crowdsourcing to this handbook, and it almost becomes your own internal codification of the knowledge about that subject inside the school. And if you want to know how to do this handbook, it's not easy to do because as human beings, we like discussing, we like problem solving, we don't like documentation, but it is critical to an all remote operation. And maybe this codification of the handbook is one idea you can try out or pilot out in the immediate present. The other thing that GitLab does, which is extremely important, and I'm sure you are doing it too, but is this focus on virtual water coolers, because we're all stressed, we're not feeling socialized, we're missing seeing each other. So we can do all of that virtually. And here, I would say the only constraint to what we can do is our own creativity. So I was speaking to someone in India, and in her company, they're doing virtual water coolers to help kids with their homework. They're doing virtual DJ sessions. So you could really, and if you're dealing with school children, I'm sure they can have their own creative ideas of how to set up these virtual water coolers. So those were 3 specific ideas for managing the present. The virtual water coolers, the use of asynchronous communication channels such as Slack, which gives people time to think, and then the codification of the ideas for a class or for a subject using this crowdsourced handbook. So the handbook, once again, is not written by the teacher. It's written by the teacher, the students across sections, the students across grades, and becomes a living document. Now, imagining the future, I'll just say 2 things and then I'll stop, and then we can go to the discussion part of the talk. What could a future with work from anywhere look like for schools? So as I was thinking about the topic, I thought about 2 things. maybe we can find, or schools can find, teachers everywhere. So I'll just mention one specific example that I'm more knowledgeable about. So I've been working with the Niti Aayog on return migration of talent to these Indian educational institutions, but primarily colleges and universities. And as part of that research, I've come across these initiatives. I'll mention one of the initiatives that might be something that we can think about collectively, even for schools. It's called Gyan, and some of you might know this. It was piloted by IIT Kharagpur. And what they did was they brought these really, really globally reputed teachers, not researchers, teachers, down to these Indian institutions for a week or 2 weeks. And what then happened was, of course, the person delivers the content when he or she is here in person in India. But then what if we just extended that train of thought? And imagine now a world-class teacher, and of course you are all, India has just an amazing human capital base for teachers. But if someone is working on something, say on machine learning or artificial intelligence in MIT, a postdoc or a professor, and if that person is spending a week in India, and if he or she then spends that week with school children, building that face-to-face communication, imparting some knowledge, but what if then the person goes back and then continues that relationship with the school students over a Zoom classroom? So maybe you can find teachers everywhere. And I know of some startups and companies in China that are doing this. They're bringing this crop of world-class teachers into India. The other thing I would say is that just given the great human capital we have in Indian teachers, maybe work from anywhere, as it gets more accepted as a model, could help Indian teachers reach out to global students. So I would feel, I feel that finding teachers everywhere can be a two-way process. The last thing I'll say is that you work with very talented students, but there are very talented students who are not as fortunate to come to your schools. So one project that I've been studying for the past 2.5 years is the CSRL project. I've been working very closely with CSRL, and many of you might know them. They are the Center for Social Responsibility and Leadership. And they've set up all these Super 30s, not the Patna Super 30 on which the movie was made, but these really, really interesting Super 30s. And the model is they always do it in partnership with some PSU, state-owned entities such as the Indian Army or GAIL or Indian Oil and ONGC and so on. And they do it in very remote places. So they have about 30 of these Super 30s, and 2 of them are in Kashmir. And I specifically studied the Kashmiri students. And the girls in Kashmir actually had to be brought to Delhi, and they are taught in this Indian Oil Super 30 in Delhi. But what I found in that research is they are really, really only working with the tip of the talent iceberg in Kashmir. There are so many more students who are left out. And I don't know if Kashmir is the motivating example, but that is true all over India. There are so many talented students who are outside the purview of this excellent education system that all of you represent. And I wonder whether there could be some student everywhere models where you find these students and everyone has a mobile phone, and create these sort of interactions between these students and the teachers in your schools or students in your schools to create an educational system that also caters to this periphery. So I think that is where I'll stop. And once again, you are the experts in running schools. I hope my ideas of working on remote work models with companies was helpful. And I'm also here to learn from your questions. So I'll pass it to Dr. Annie, and then I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, Prithviraj. That definitely gave us some ideas from the area that you're researching. I was just thinking when I was listening to you that, work as defined by you seems to be largely the teachers, the flexibility, the mobility of teachers. But if education is not the fun that it's supposed to be, and largely given the kind of examination system we have, children would largely say it's not much fun, it's work. How would you sort of apply this concept of geography, work of geography, or the geography of work to students and, them attending school from wherever or whichever school that they want? How would you sort of put your ideas onto that idea?
It's a very interesting thought, Dr. Koshi. And, I think just given how new this phenomena is, I feel it is just at the stage of nascency right now, and it requires all our creativity. But as I said, the first thought that came to my mind was that India has such a wonderful school, educational system, but it only caters to the core, in my mind, right? And there's a huge periphery out there, which is for all kinds of reasons excluded from this wonderful education. So what if the schools that all of you represent individually or collectively create a platform where now these kids from Kashmir and Manipur and rural Kerala and rural West Bengal can also participate in some sort of discourse and pedagogy with you guys? And what if your students can also engage in that process? So it becomes really a community, a platform for these peripheral students to learn from you, for your students to learn from their experiences. And I just feel that, if you take out geography as a constraint, so what I'm trying to do through my research is to say where you live is not a constraint. So if you just make that assumption, and now with Zoom and Skype and all these other communication tools that we have, what if we created really a vibrant community where you live is not a constraint? And what will be those specific business models for Indian schools? I think that's a longer discussion. And honestly, you are the experts embedded in that reality. So I'm sure you will do a much better job than me articulating what those business models might look like. Have we lost Dr. Koshi? I think.
Yeah, I think Dr. Koshi was having some internet issues even earlier. So I think we'll wait for her to come back, Prithviraj. But I think that was just another very interesting take on the issue. And you very interestingly redefined work from anywhere as separate from being work from home, which itself is, while we're still adjusting to work from home, this was a very interesting take on what work from anywhere is going to mean. Now, there are questions that people have about, someone has a pretty meta question on what if we never go back to normal? What if there is no normal? And I'm not really sure how you can address that in this context, but would you have a take on that?
So from my, vantage point, I see a new normal emerging, and I'm really excited about this work from anywhere normal, because it has many, many implications just beyond where people live and work.
Yeah.
So many of us have been forced to move to these really expensive cities to work. And that's not only true in India, that's true globally. So Silicon Valley, for instance, is just the real estate and the cost of living is exorbitant there.
Yeah.
In a work from anywhere model, and it's already happening. I've been studying this in the context of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a foundation started this remote project about 3 years back. And they are attracting these remote workers back to this really small town in the middle of America from the coasts. And many of these workers actually coming are teachers. So I should have mentioned that. And the benefit is these people moving to these smaller towns can now raise their families with a bigger house, and the cost of living is much cheaper. But then it reverses the brain drain that we have seen for decades from small towns to large cities, and then from our country to the US or the West. So we could now potentially have a reversal of the brain drain. We could now have people coming back to where their homes are. And that could have huge implications for both the hubs, but also the periphery.
Yeah. Yeah, reverse brain drain is very interesting. We've always been used to a unidirectional brain drain in this country, at least, of which you, of course, are an example. Um, one of the things that uh, people are concerned with at this. I think Annie ma'am's back. Welcome
Sorry,
back, Koshi. I'll see
I'm so
myself
sorry.
out.
There was a storm in Delhi and some of the electricity seems to be coming and going. Uh, Prithviraj, I was just thinking about the fact that since outcomes are so important in in education, how would we actually, when you talk about the fact that we could sort of come together, we could crowdsource, we could teach from anywhere, children could attend from everywhere. I mean, you say that where you are should not, be your ticket to an education. But in India, what you are, the color of your skin, your caste, your creed, everything defines your opportunity to education. And since online has shown, as our previous speakers also said, the great divide that is there and the class system of education, and how when all of us talk about online, we sort of forget that. So how would you actually think, off the cuff about this whole issue of children who can't actually access online? And how would this geography of work help them if you had to sort of apply your mind to that? What would be your suggestions?
Yeah, so no, I think that's a good question. And I don't have any easy solutions right now, but online access is critical for working from anywhere or living anywhere to work. And, the assumption I'm making is that now with a mobile phone, many people compared to 10 years back have that access. Now, there still might be kids and students who are excluded from that access, but I think there is enough to work with. And so I feel the question is, how do we pilot this, say, for instance, if the idea is to create a community or a crowdsourced portal where your students are not only graded on how they do in exams, but how they codify knowledge. How do you create an open sourced physics portal where the ideas that have been taught in your schools traditionally for decades are now codified? And these experiments are sort of codified and it becomes a living document. And then how is that portal or community shared with students in the periphery? And how do your students, the students in the school, then reach out to these kids living in rural Manipur, learn from their day-to-day lives and their talent and their ideas, and how does it become a pan-India? And that's just one idea that I thought about, but I'm sure there are many ideas that can be piloted. The only conceptual point I really wanted to stress again is work from anywhere or live anywhere really cuts through the constraint of where people live. So if there is a really, really good rowing coach somewhere in the world and someone wants to learn those techniques, then instead of bringing him or her down to Delhi or Calcutta, you could get on Zoom and learn those techniques now, right? So I feel that is the paradigm shift in thinking that I'm trying to sort of get across.
So there are a lot of questions about your water cooler. I mean, how do we actually do these virtual water coolers? And it's connected, I presume, to the emotional strength of the employees. They would really like you to elaborate a little bit more on how the virtual water coolers would work and what should the employer really keep in mind when, sort of doing that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I feel first, I just wanted to sort of reiterate why we need virtual water coolers. And we especially need them right now, just given the stress and the emotional sort of issues that we are all dealing with and the lack of life and family balance. But the reason we need a virtual water cooler is many of the conversations that happen in the physical world happen around these serendipitous interactions where you might be sitting in the staff room, or you might be passing each other in the corridor, and then someone says something and the other person learns something serendipitously. And now that is the opportunity that these all remote organizations do not have. So instead, what they have done is they have created these virtual water coolers. And how do you set up one? There are 2 or 3 principles. One, you shouldn't force anyone to join one, because no one forces anyone to join a serendipitous conversation in the staff room or the corridor. So this should be something that people can self-select. Typically, they don't have a topic. Typically, these are sessions where anyone can join and talk about anything. So it might be, how was your weekend? How you're dealing with kids during this lockdown. Sometimes they are programmed. So I've seen examples where people are saying, let's do one on Friday where we are now getting a DJ, or let's do one focused on yoga. But there has to also be a lot of informality, right? The other thing is it really helps. So one thing that the virtual water coolers can do, which the physical water coolers can't do, is to cut through the hierarchy of the organization. So it's very hard for the principal to socially interact with every teacher or every student every week. But the principal can join a virtual water cooler and speak to like 100 people at the same time. But the guiding principle there is you really have to let your hair down. You cannot have those formal, people need to have, so quoting my colleague Amy Edmondson's work, there has to be a lot of psychological safety in these water coolers. So people should be able to speak their mind. It should not be treated as one more company meeting or school meeting. And I think that is the culture that percolates from the top. So if the principal or the vice principal joins these sessions once in a while and really creates that psychological safety, I feel people can then get really creative around these virtual water coolers. And then students can have their own virtual water coolers. They can be virtual water coolers that connect different grades, if that's relevant. They can be thematic water coolers around hobbies, interests. But once again, they should be not forced on people, and they should be relatively unstructured, and there should be a lot of psychological safety for people to speak up and talk freely as they would do in the corridor or the staff room.
Yeah, thank you. You did say that in your research, you found that working remotely was productive in the USA and not so productive in China. Can you sort of expand on your idea of productivity? I mean, how did you sort of, define productivity when you said it was good in USA and not so much in China?
So let me clarify. So what I said was that I found an increase in productivity, and I'll define that in a minute, in the US Patent Office. And this was for their work from anywhere program. And what I found in China was in the immediate aftermath of the COVID-19 lockdown, when people were forced to work from home, their productivity went down. And the distinction is important because what we are experiencing now is a forced working from home. This is not remote work under normal circumstances. So, and everyone's productivity is getting hurt. So that is what I'm finding in the Chinese study. And the US Patent Office is, that study was done. So I did it 3 years back, but the data was from 2012 and 2013. So there was no pandemic, there was nothing. It was working from anywhere under normal circumstances. But to your specific question of how we measured productivity in that circumstance, it's very easy to do it in the patent office because you can see how many patents people examine every week. So it's very measurable. It's very measurable. But if you are doing the same analysis in your schools, you need to be more creative, right? It just cannot be test scores. I would say, how many entries have you made to the online handbook? That can be a measure, which is very objective. But you need to make it very measurable and objective and fair.
Yes, I mean, that was what I was thinking about when you spoke about productivity, because, education is this, such a sort of, fine gossamer kind of cloth, which, the weft and waft is hardly defined. And this online teaching, as you say, was forced on all of us. I mean, we had 4 hours notice, to actually get up and start running. And we were all sort of building the ship as we sailed. And so what we have found as teachers is that when we work from home, there doesn't seem to be any definition of working hours. I mean, you'll call for meetings. What would your advice be of, about working hours, and how do we actually get that correct?
No, that's an excellent question, and that is a challenge that these all remote companies have really taken head on. And the way they have done so, if you think about Zapier or GitLab, which are all remote, so they don't have physical offices. They are always working from home all over the world. The additional problem is they have to work across time zones. And so the problem is more acute for them. So there might be someone in the middle time zone who has to stay up until midnight every day. And so they have really regulated that in two ways. One, they have given freedom to the employee to choose her working hours. So there is no mandated 9 to 5 or 10 to 6. It is work when it is good for you. They provide a lot of coaching for people not to work constantly. They provide individual coaching to people where there are yoga trainers and other therapists who would ensure that you are setting alarms to get up from your chair, or you're setting alarms to go for a walk, or you're not working over the weekends. And if they see that your work hours are exceeding some normal, because they track that, they will send you an email saying, hey, what's going on? You need to slow down. And the third thing they do is, why do we have these meetings at 8 p.m.? Sometimes they are to discuss very trivial things that could be discussed on a Slack channel. And maybe the principal can post his or her question, and then the teachers don't have to react that night. They could wake up the next morning and react to it. So what these all remote companies have done is they have scaled down these face-to-face Zoom calls. They have very few face-to-face Zoom calls. And actually, most of their communication happens on Slack channels, where people are not reacting face-to-face. And that has taken out a lot of their unnecessary meetings that happen late at night.
So what you're saying is that both employer and employee has to recognize a particular culture and respect the individuality. And, I mean, if I'm the kind of head that just wants to shoot my, head off at a different time, and that doesn't work, I can call someone on a one-to-one and still be a pain, So definitely it requires a certain personality and could you tell us, since your research is through with CSRL and Gyan, how this online and working not from home, but working, with this geographical freedom, how did that actually impact the success of the Super 30s?
So they have not embraced remote working. They are doing it right now, just like all of us. But in their model, the constraint has been, the biggest constraint which I feel working from anywhere can solve is that if you find a very talented student in Manipur, they do not have a center in Manipur. They tried to open one, but they had to close it down. So these Manipur boys were moved to Delhi. Or if you find a very talented girl student in Kashmir, they do not have a center for girls in Kashmir. So the girls all have to come to Delhi. And there are many families and many students who do not want to do that. They do not want to leave Manipur or leave Delhi. So they are left behind. So that is the constraint. So, and the thinking I was doing on myself reflectively yesterday was, what if they did not have to come to Delhi? What if if they could stay in Manipur or Kashmir, but participate in a Super 30 curriculum from there? And so would that increase the number of students that Super 30s could reach out to? And would that same principle apply to the schools that all of you lead? Could you reach out to students who do not have a place to live in Delhi? Or even if you provided some hostel, they're not psychologically safe to come to Delhi. And could you provide them with some world-class content while they live in Kashmir or Manipur or very remote places?
We have homes in Delhi. When I'm saying the government and individuals who run homes for children of the street, they have had difficulty in accessing online classes. Sometimes they don't have the instrument, sometimes they don't have the connection. And we ourselves have a school in Madhya Pradesh, Orcha. And when we tried, we found that actually uh, they don't have the phones. And then we said, okay, audio karte hain. And then they said, ma'am, par hamara charge hi khatam ho raha hai, wo paise bhej do charge ke liye. So, I mean, definitely there's much to be done from the government side also before we can move into this whole thing. Your children, I think, are very young, Prithviraj, right?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
would you sort of recommend to them, would you recommend for them an online class? What kind of classes would you like to get for them if you are thinking of this freedom of geography?
No, I think it should definitely be for their generation. It should be one of the options in the toolkit. I don't think it can be the only. So we were discussing this yesterday. I feel students learn a lot from co-location, being congregated. There's a lot of social and emotional learning that happens in those settings. There's a lot of reflective learning that happens in those settings. And I'm not suggesting that all that be replaced. But I'm saying this could be an additional toolkit. So, if I have two boys, my elder son is 11 and a half. And what if, in a summer, I take him to India hypothetically, and maybe I'll try this, and he finds a great teacher on some ancient Indian, say the Ramayana or Mahabharata, which he should learn, and then continues that relationship online, even after he comes back to the United States. I think that definitely should be an option, right? And so what if our teachers could impart the learnings that we've had for not only years, but decades and centuries to the entire diaspora spread out all over the world? What if my kids develop some interest in robotics, and there's a professor in Berkeley, and I introduced my son to him, and he just spends 1 hour every month just inspiring these kids, right? So I feel learning has been constrained by geography, and maybe if we take out geography from that set of constraints, there can be much richer knowledge flows across these boundaries that are completely artificial in today's Zoom age or Skype age. And Dr. Koshi, I just want to react to the internet connectivity problem. I totally agree with you. And why I brought that up is, if Indian Oil or ONGC is spending lakhs and lakhs of rupees for these Kashmiri girls to come to Delhi and live in their hostels and learn, they could spend the same money giving SIM cards or data plans to kids in Kashmir so that they can live there and learn the content. So I feel there is money, there is sponsorship already available. It just needs to be redirected in a different way.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea, because actually learning within a cultural milieu, learning within a context is a very essential part of learning. We learn from our peers, we learn through reflection, and reflection in Kashmir will definitely be different from reflection in a more, hi-fi Delhi place, in where you're disconnected from your culture and things like that. So, could you just tell me your thoughts about how assessment, you know, you've gone through the CBSE system, I think, and you know that it's a very content-based assessment pattern. So when you look at online teaching and teachers, say, assessing from across the globe, what do you think would be the areas that they would assess? And, cheating is a big thing in India. You should not be cheating. And when we tried doing assessments during this COVID times, it was everyone come on to screen, we are watching you, and we'll give you your test then and there. So, I mean, we are so caught up in this no cheating scenario, and how do we, and that testing content all the time. But
Dr.
education.
Koshi, sorry to interrupt, but we are down to the last 1 minute.
Yes,
So, thank
we
you.
will shut them. So I think we didn't hear the bell. And so will you quickly answer that so that we can
No,
move
no.
on
So
to the
in 30 seconds, the final thought I have is, our evaluations, first of all, I went to the West Bengal board, which was very rigorous. And it was entirely rote learning and a lot of test taking. I feel the model the final thought I'll leave with the community is, what if the evaluation can be done by the peers? So today, if I'm a software engineer, my evaluation is actually done by peers on forums such as GitHub or others, Stack Overflow, where I get badges from people. So if the learning is transformed from a test-taking system to a community-based system where the peers can actually evaluate other peers based on the ideas they post in these online portals, that might be a way to sort of break down this test-taking focus that we have
Yes.
in many cases.
Definitely a time to sort of reimagine ourselves. Thank you so much, Prithviraj. That has been so wonderful. And I hope we are well within time. Thank you, everyone. On to the next session.
Thank you, Prithviraj, and thank you, Dr. Koshi. I think that was just enthralling. In fact, now I think it's pretty clear that this conference needed to be at least a week long, because each one of us, I think, wants to hear each one of you for at least 3 or 4 hours. It's just fascinating, the kind of issues you've brought out, Prithviraj and ma'am, through your questions. Thank you very much. That was an absolutely fantastic session. And with that, I think we can let you go on to your other pursuits. Of course, you're free to attend the other sessions that we have. We have one more session to go. I'm sure you'll all agree that that was just an absolutely terrific session. I just loved the virtual water cooler and so many other things that Prithviraj said. There's a lot to think about, obviously, when you translate that into India, but I think we owe them both a word of thanks for that absolutely fantastic session. Our next session is an important one. It's going to have school leaders talking about how to balance the needs of a well-rounded education with the need to conduct classes online. And there are exemplar schools in India which have already done that. And that's the session that we'll be coming back with in exactly 4 minutes. The session will be moderated by Manit Jain, who is the chairperson of FICCI Arise. We will see you in exactly 4 minutes from now. Welcome back. Our panel is ready, and so I'll just do a quick introduction. The panel is called Transition to Virtual Learning, Challenges, Exemplars, and Opportunities. It is going to be moderated by Manit Jain, who is chairperson of FICCI Arise, the school education arm of FICCI. An education leader for 20 years through his institutions, Manit has brought experiential education to the mainstream in India. Over the years, he has consistently challenged the status quo, being at the forefront of educational reforms in the country. Welcome, Manit. Thank you for agreeing to moderate this very important session. And may I now hand over to you.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you for having me here, and welcome everyone to this panel. I'd like to quickly introduce all of our esteemed panelists. I'll start with Srivads Jaipuria, Vice Chairperson of MR Seth Jaipuria Institutions and alumnus of Stern, New York University. He's the Vice Chairperson of this group of 40 institutions, schools, and colleges across UP, Madhya Pradesh, and Bihar, with schools with fee structures ranging from rupees 2,000 to rupees 8,000. So really wide spectrum. We have Linda, an alumna of Wharton and University of Chicago, who leads, is the vice president of the international part of College Board's work. Has been there since 2007, providing opportunities for students outside of the US to connect with higher ed in the US and globally through programs such as SAT and advanced placements. Vishnu, an alumnus of the Harvard Grad School of Education, after a long career in consulting, coaching, and training for 12 years now, he has been an education leader, steering the Heritage Schools change story. Pamela, who's been associated with the Shiv Nadar Foundation for over 10 years now, leads strategic initiatives at the Vidya Gyan School, which is a unique and radical initiative that handpicks bright stars from rural, underprivileged backgrounds and aims at creating leaders from the bottom of the pyramid. Pamela holds an MBA in social leadership. Thank you all for joining us. If someone had told me 6 months ago that tens of thousands of schools across this country will be running online through phones, through laptops, through tablets, in the synchronous, asynchronous mode, I would have said impossible. It's not going to happen. Lo and behold, our heroes, our teachers, our school leaders really rose to the challenge, and as many of the earlier speakers spoke about it, in practically no time, they got ready for online teaching. Some of them may have never even used emails. Such was the intensity of the transition, changing their lesson plans, changing their curriculum, the entire content, pedagogy, everything, having to adapt so quickly is really commendable. In a recent survey that E&Y Parthenon had run, 50K plus schools had about a 70% adoption. I'm saying 50,000 rupees per annum plus schools. And this was about 30% in the sub 50K bracket, which means a lot of schools in our country. And what is also very fascinating about this shift is that I remember very vividly when we started, a large part of the parent community was saying, what kind of an eyewash is this? Should this even happen? Are you all doing this so you can continue to collect fee? And almost 2.5 months later, now there is a clamor for education to happen online in the entire academic session. We've seen a petition that's crossed 500,000 petitioners. who are now saying it is not safe to open schools. Why don't you just go online? So definitely schools have done something very, very right. And let's begin with Srivat's sharing with us one of these inspiring stories. Over to you, Srivat.
Hi, is my screen visible and I'm audible, Manit? All right. Thank you, Manit. Thank you, Ashoka University, for inviting me to speak at this conference. It's really a pleasure to be part of this unique group of schools and education leaders that are going to be talking here today. As Manit said, when people said 6 months ago what we have been able to do, if we were asked to imagine that, it would be almost impossible. Just to give you a context of where we come from at St. M.R. Jaipuria schools, we have a school in Lucknow that has been running since 1992, that is a premier school there. But over the last 6 years or so, we've gone decidedly into smaller cities and towns. And today we have 32 schools operational with 25,000 students. Our average fee range is around 3,900 rupees a month. So below that 50,000 rupees a year bracket that Manit talked about, where technology adoption has happened. So it was really a big challenge for us in terms of can we firstly imagine and then implement online classes taking place in these types of towns, cities, and schools. Again, to give you a context of the kinds of towns and cities that we are present in, we are, in terms of our schools, we are covering 3 states, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Madhya Pradesh, with a larger focus on Uttar Pradesh. And we are majorly in district headquarters, so cities that range in a population from 100,000 to 700,000 people, which in the context of India are pretty small cities. In the last 2 or 3 years, we have also gone to sub-district towns where the population is below 1 lakh, according to official figures. So in terms of our response, as we started this about 3 or 4 months back and realized that we have to really adapt to the physical premises of a school closing, we tried to think about what model we could adapt. And probably the first model in front of us was that adapted by sort of larger schools in Delhi, Bombay, etc. But we somehow quickly realized that probably that was not going to work for us. We had a large amount of consultations with teachers and parents. And we found that the medium that the majority of people are comfortable with and has large amount of usage across India was WhatsApp. So we said, let's start here. And we started by creating lesson videos recorded by teachers, having doubt clearance sessions, using WhatsApp groups to send question papers and assignments. And even teachers went the extra mile in case, a student did not have access to a smartphone. They did send even audio recordings to them. So slowly, while starting with WhatsApp as a primary medium, over the past 2 months, we have transitioned to a more synchronous model where we are using now Zoom, MS Teams, Google Hangout, and other tools as well. I think what worked for us, other than this, was that we quickly realized that we don't have all the answers. And when we interacted with parents right at the beginning of the lockdown in March and April, we were happy to admit that we don't have all the answers. And that's why the parent community was able to really respond and work with us, because they felt that we are open to their concerns. And these PTMs were not prescriptive, rather larger discussion forums. Recently, only a few days ago, we did a teacher survey. And as you see, WhatsApp was a primary tool used by teachers across our schools even now. But I think what is more important to understand is that even now, and even in our premier schools, we see, if you see the right side of this page, that a combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning probably works better than only synchronous learning. We are thinking about the physical school model where, once a student comes in, we have to teach them everything and then they go home. But probably that is not the ideal to overload a student in 3 hours. If you use asynchronous model, it allows the student to learn at their own pace as well, probably do some learnings in the evening. So even for premier schools, I think this is a big lesson that you can take. Uh, Traditionally, the school runs for 3-4 hours at a time. Try to spread out the learning either through synchronous spreading out or through using asynchronous learning, where the student can self-pace their learning within a day. Teacher training and empowerment was very important to us. Again, as I said, 3 months ago, we could have never imagined our teachers would be where they have come and the effort that they would make. I think we really treated teachers at par with frontline warriors on COVID. Many people talk about the media, police people, but teachers put in an extraordinary effort as well. We try to empower them by training them both on pedagogy and technology, but also provided a lot of support from the head office in terms of providing SOPs for each and every technology medium, be it Zoom, Google Hangout, even for WhatsApp do's and don'ts, curriculum planning and calendar planning. And also we created a lot of content and conducted sample classes that teachers could attend. It was really important for us to sort of set the example and set the expectations. Also created role models out of those teachers. So a teacher whose classes are going really well, they would be shown across the network of schools to our teachers so that they could really learn from them and that sort of peer learning could happen. Our head office team attended classes and gave feedback to teachers. I think this could happen much more effectively, and we've probably done much more of this now than we did in the past. Again, parents as partners, really parents had to come through for us. They borrowed devices from neighbors. There's amazing anecdotes that I have, probably won't be able to share here. But the asynchronous videos really allowed them to self-pace and for the learning to be flexible. We embraced the fact that parents are going to be in the room and really showcase our teaching learning abilities. This was the time to do that. I think also we use parents in assessments as invigilators. I know this has its detractors, but it really passed on the idea of integrity to students and parents. Very often in India, we tend to distrust parents and students, and I think there's an important lesson that could be learned in integrity for parents as well through this process. Overall satisfaction with online classes. Again, we did this recently, 2,000 plus parents responded, and I think we were reasonably satisfied with the feedback. But I think what is more interesting to me is that if I divide this feedback into even, looking at the kind of cities our schools in, so we were able to get excellent feedback even in cities below 2 lakhs and below 1 lakh population. So sub-district towns, in district headquarters, and then also in larger cities like Lucknow, Patna, Varanasi, and so on. Teacher perception of stakeholder satisfaction also across. So the teacher was not only satisfied, but they thought the parent and student is satisfied as well. So this is the caveat I want to end with. Even though parent satisfaction is high and teacher satisfaction is high, when you ask teachers, what is your perception of learning? It is much lower than in a physical classroom. So we say, is it always at par with a physical classroom being 5? They are only rating learning at 3.7 and attendance at 3.7 as well. This means that, online is great, but eventually it is a second best alternative to the physical classroom. Stakeholder expectations are lower because they are viewing this as a temporary solution. So I think I want to end with this caveat because we have the risk of being too gung-ho about this and think that this could replace physical schools forever. There is a lot that people learn while coming to school, and the physical and social development of students is also important. Just ending with opportunities for the future. I think lessons in integrity and self-discipline. I think these are huge lessons to learn in this temporary time period. Huge tests that we are giving our students and our parents. Teacher training and class observations, we've done more of those than we have done in years in the last 2 months. And schools will never be forced to close down for summer, for winter, for riots. Only school buildings will. So I think these are lessons that we need to take with us even post this COVID crisis. And these will change the way we conduct school education probably forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sriwats. It's incredible that you all are being able to ensure continuous learning for all kids across all your schools. And I see that strategically, or in fact, you did not really have a choice in this matter. You had to choose the asynchronous mode a lot more than the synchronous mode. Hats off to your teachers for recording their lessons. Hats off to you for engaging the parents. I think one of the key lessons here in the journey of the Jaipurias is around engaging parents earlier on, winning their trust, and then trusting them back in the assessments, and really building a community of learners, teachers, parents, and students alongside. Brilliant work, Srivads, and some fantastic insights for the audience. Next up is Vishnu from the Heritage Schools. Again, Vishnu jumped into this very, very early. In the first week of March itself, Heritage decided to shut down for a week. They could see the lockdown coming, and they suspended all classes and got into professional development of teachers on several online platforms. So by the 16th of March, we'd hit the ground running much before the lockdown was announced. So Vishnu, over to you.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Manit, and thank you, Ashoka University, for this wonderful webinar. I find it hard to ignore the fact that there are about 1,600 people on a Friday evening listening to this webinar. It talks a lot about the potential of technology in the education space itself. I've been in this field attending and speaking in conferences for the last 10, 12 years. Never have I had an audience of 1,600 people. And the average number of people I connect every week is probably more than 3,000, 4,000. And I'm sure many of my panelists would agree that the opportunities for technology is phenomenal. I'm just going to quickly take a couple of seconds to share my slides. Can you see the slides?
No, Vishnu, we did and we lost them. Okay, now it's showing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so one of my challenges tonight is going to be how do we talk about this 3-month-long journey in 8 minutes? I'm sure a lot of educators would agree that this 3 months kind of looks like 3 years. I mean, I don't even recollect what happened pre-COVID because of the intensity of what we went through in the last 3 months. At the outset, I want to congratulate all the educators, school leaders, teachers, parents, and students out there in this conference because like Manit and Srivads had shared, I think teachers and schools rose up to the occasion. 3 months back, we saw a lot of agitation from parents, questioning what are we doing in schools. Today, I think parents are really wanting to continue the online education. The last I checked, I have about 95% attendance in my classes. This is much higher, in fact, almost higher than what I would probably be having in my physical classes. Right now, we have shut the school, but there are summer support programs running. Even then, I have a 90% attendance in it. Talks a lot about the engagement and the hard work teachers have put in. Over the last 3 months, me and my team have also trained about 2,000 teachers and school leaders around technology, virtual learning. And I see a lot of great work happening around the country. So hats off to the educators. I'm sure post-COVID, our own credibility and standing of private schools at least would be much higher in the public's mind space. I also want to address just about 10 seconds on this topic of why learning continuity is important. It's extremely important for parents and policymakers to understand that learning continuity is extremely critical to ensure student learning levels don't drop. There have been significant research, at least in the West, especially around long summer vacations. I think Brookings Institute, for example, had done some longitudinal studies of how even 2.5, 3 months of breaks without any learning support will lead to significant drops, especially around reading and writing. So my urge to school leaders is, even if the COVID extends beyond the next 3 or 4 months, we have to have some ways in which we reach out, even in situations where there is an difficulty in accessing hardware or even Wi-Fi connections. Even a simple phone call, for example, there is some research by Brookings University Institute that even a phone call every week leads to a 5 to 10 percentage point increase in reading levels, for example. So what we're doing right now, however ineffective, however imperfect it could be, still has a purpose, and we need to recognize that. In our 3-month-long journey, there are some insights we have gained and some mistakes we made. And I'm going to talk about 3 top insights which I would like to share with my team. I wish I had known this, and I'm glad we realized this through our journey. The first insight we have to make any virtual learning program successful is to focus on relationships. And the second insight is online videos is not virtual learning. I think there's a need for educators to recognize that virtual learning is not about online videos through Google Hangout on Zoom. There's a lot which has to happen before and after a video session. And the third insight which we have is that in times like these, it's extremely important to go back to the basics around repurposed curriculum and around focusing on the core instruction leadership practices. I'm going to spend a bit about each of these insights. The first on primacy of relationships. When we started this journey of virtual learning, by the way, we implemented a technology platform about 3 to 4 years back, but it kind of didn't get institutionalized the way we would like it to, because there's not necessarily a buy-in across our teachers. But the COVID gave a great excuse for us to start using that platform for better transaction of teaching and learning. But when we started on, we clarified to our teachers that transition to a virtual learning is not a technical challenge, but an adaptive challenge. It is not about tools and techniques alone, but it's about relationships, about care, about love, and about holding the community together. So we spend a lot of time with our teaching community around holding them together and telling them that, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. We are with you, and we will give you that space and support for you to try out and figure out and help you improve your craft. We also reached out to several parents to help them understand their concerns, reached out to students, created rituals in our everyday teaching and weekly schedules to make those one-on-one connects. So for us, it's extremely important that online teaching is about nurturing relationships more than the technical aspects. And one of the things which we did over the last 3 months is to focus on social emotional learning curriculum. So we had built a social emotional learning curriculum called the Human Framework, and we had developed some social emotional SEL standards and learning targets. We repurposed them for the virtual world, and we focused an inordinate amount of time and energy around these. Shrivats was very right. Online learning cannot replicate the physical class time, and it should not replicate also, because in an online setup, there are far more important goals in the life of the child which we need to address. And we created a specific program around addressing those to ensure that the mental and the emotional health of the child and the parent remains good to continue the learning process. The second insight our community realized is that online videos is not virtual learning, which essentially means that if a school has only video sessions, which is synchronous learning sessions, as the primary medium of teaching and learning, then student engagement levels will significantly drop down. I mean, that's true of physical classes too. Lectures, a sage on the stage is not going to help students learn. What we then focused on is to ensure that we have a playlist, a technology where there's a playlist what students have to learn, and so that it enables a student to take the lead in learning. So it's like we go to a YouTube channel, for example, there is a playlist which is curated to you. So what we created was a simple playlist online where the students do the pre-reads and the post-reads so that they are better prepared for the synchronous classes. For example, this is a snapshot of the system which we had created for each of our classes, where on the left you could see the playlist. You could see day-wise schedules, what they need to do. They also need, on the right, you can see what are the learning targets for the day, what they need to do before the synchronous class, what they need to do after that. You can also see some of the assignment which is posted there. So student is not hooked onto the screen always. There is a certain level of autonomy and certain sense of freedom you provide to the student to navigate that learning journey. There is also some tools and techniques we created where we can manage the business of teaching and learning, where I can see how many kids have read lessons, how many kids have not read lessons. If they've not read the specific article or not seen the video, the teacher is able to send a reminder. One of the problems with online learning or even online schools is the rigor of follow-up, so that students are able to stick on to a routine. The reason why 97% of people who attend MOOCs drop out and they don't complete is because there is no discipline and there's nobody to ensure discipline of completion of the course. So it's extremely important to have a framework or a system to ensure follow-through and ensure some check-ins so that students are kept on the task. The third insight is that we focused on the basics around focusing on what is important with respect to curriculum. We did not try to replicate the entire syllabus. We only focused on what is worth learning in these virtual learning environments. We also focused on something very foundational for any good school, which is instructional leadership. We relooked at the teacher observation framework, which we had developed. We started looking at what is important in a virtual learning platform. We trained teachers quickly and said, hey, among the 21 odd competencies you need to exhibit, we wanted to focus on the first two, which is, if you look at the top of the pyramid, you will see self-directed learning and substantive conversations. Now, these are two things which is extremely difficult for an average teacher in a physical classroom. But what we realized is that when you flip the classroom and you move to an online or a virtual environment, it's extremely easy, relatively easy to focus on these two things. And so that's one of the things which we did. We also ensured that there is peer observations virtually, there is virtual feedback given. There is also support provided for teachers who are struggling in terms of getting the classes on track. So we created frameworks to support. There's also a coaching advisory model specific around virtual learning pedagogies, which we created internally. So that's about what we did. And those are the three key insights. I'll talk more about it if there are any questions in the Q&A session. But I also want to talk about possibilities. What do we see going forward? One key thing we have realized is this virtual learning is here to stay. I don't think it is just a band-aid to manage the COVID situation. I think even the COVID situation is going to extend beyond the 3 or 4 months. It's probably going to run well into the next year. Even if it doesn't, I think the virtual learning is going to stay here. One of the analogies I was reading is that before the World War I, armies used to fight using the trench system or just used to shoot each other. But when they came out of the World War I think the entire army got mechanized, and it led to a huge boost in the way industrialization happened in the world. My sense is this is the excuse the world was looking for to reform education, and we see a lot of transition happening in the K-12 space as well, specifically on three things. One, I think there is going to be a lot of focus on personalized learning pathways, and which is not possible in a physical curriculum and a physical setup. It is absolutely possible and necessary in a virtual world. Second, I think there is an entire focus on assessments. People often talk about reform and curriculum. I think that's a wrong way to approach. What is important is reform and assessments. If reform and assessments happen, curriculum automatically reforms. So virtual learning makes it necessary for us to move away from the standardized test or moving away from a test which is just an MCQ or a quiz. You're going to focus more on authentic and real life assessments. And the third possibility, which I hope it's going to happen, and it is happening in our context, is the access to teachers is not limited to what I find in a 10, 20 kilometer radius to the physical class school. Now we are able to access some of the world's best teachers. Right now, we are able to get teachers from Oxford, able to get teachers from Southeast Asia, from south of India, teachers from US, for example. Some of them are doing pro bono work, and it's not even expensive. There are a lot of free resources available, which is not possible before in a physical context. But in a virtual world, we bring the world into the classroom, and probably one of the reasons why students find this very engaging. Two last things I just want to share is one, when you're looking at virtual learning, look at it as a comprehensive program. We had created an entire program, an entire platform, entire curriculum around it. We didn't look at it just as a Zoom or a Google Hangout or any online video format, but look at it as an entire program and rally the community around this program. Second, also around focusing on capability development, we've designed and rolled out a certificate program in virtual teaching. This is here to stay. Based on our wisdom of training about 2,000 teachers, we just felt, hey, why don't we just make this as a MOOC? and so that it is accessed by one and all across the country. With this, I end my slides, Manat, and I'll wait for more Q&A.
Thank you, Vishnu. You've overrun a little bit, but brilliant insights. Again, I think what you talk about adaptive leadership in these times, it is shifting that mindset of teachers, of parents, of recognizing that this is not a temporary phase itself. It is a disruption with great opportunities for further disruption of a different kind, of a positive kind, changes that we can make towards student-directed learning, more personalized pathways, just the reforms that you're talking about. There are some incredible opportunities. There's a huge silver lining, and educators across the world must now use this boot camp to harness these opportunities. So let's move now to Pamela. Vidya Gyan is a very unique experiment. It's a residential school, and all of these students had to go back to their rural backgrounds where there are several challenges around devices, connectivity. So Pamela, over to you.
Thank you, Manit, and a very good evening and hello, friends. It's lovely being on this platform, unfortunately virtual. I wish we could all meet physically. But let me give you a little background about Vidya Gyan. So if you all are, you must be all aware that, India is 70% rural, and the children community of India, or the children population of India, 74% of the population of children are in rural India. So Vidya Gyan is a very innovative and radical institution. These are two academies which is focusing on finding talent from across India. We started off in Uttar Pradesh, where we get literally every year 2.5 lakh applications, all from parent income less than 1 lakh per annum. And we only pick up the top 400. So we have a very robust selection process. And now for the last few years, we've also been going across India. We've gone as far as Nagaland and Ladakh, all the way down south. So we have students from various states and various communities studying with us. As Manit said, these are residential schools, and it was a challenge sending them back. And when we had to go online, our first thought was that how do you teach students when they are in remote villages? And when we talk of remote villages, we're talking of villages which has no electricity, they won't have internet, they're very far off. They don't have, unfortunately, parent communities who can support them from, to learn, because most of our children are, representing farmer communities and migrant laborers. And keeping all that in mind, the first thing we did was focus on our teachers who luckily remained on campus, because these are residential schools. And, a lot of effort was spent in explaining the teachers and working with the teachers to understand technology. And how do you design an entire curriculum which is going to be taught online for to students who come in at grade 6th, when they can't speak English and, they don't know basic education systems. How do you go back to the same villages, and how do you teach online? So we worked on all those things, and while we worked on all those things, we also did a data analysis of what is the kind of medium the students can study on. And we realized that in villages, the only thing they had were smartphones. And luckily, most of our students did have it, but the enthusiasm to learn remained so high that it was interesting to see how they even borrowed smartphones from their neighbors and from friends, from relatives to study. So the enthusiasm levels remained very high. And so once we understood all that, we started designing, for us, the importance was not to complete the syllabus. It was how to make a curriculum interesting and fun and easy to learn. So how do you do project-based learning? So we worked on all those things. We got into the simple act of even understanding that if you have to teach, how does it not become boring for you? So we started off, after each class, we had a feedback from students. So we put the wardens on the job of doing a feedback to understand, are the students being able to understand? Are they being able to learn? Are they being able to retain? What do they want? And once we had that interesting learning, I think because they're children, is that attendance might be a challenge. So we started doing small classrooms, so easy to maintain, easy to understand if children have logged in, and random attendance. So we wouldn't do an attendance at the beginning of an online classroom, we would just do it randomly. So those were small learnings while we were working with these children, framework of curriculum, what we should complete, what we shouldn't, and how do you use local platforms to do projects and programs which are still a learning. So that's how we started off with the entire thing. Our focus was also to ensure that we do smaller classrooms. We did not focus on large numbers. So in a classroom setting, the way we went was we created a lot of offline materials. We realized that to make online interesting and also engaging, we need to create a lot of offline materials. So how do you create offline materials which are going to be recordings? So the way you moderate your voice, so the things you say, all that had to be worked upon. Very small tiny things had to be thought through, because we knew that when if you don't have internet and you don't have electricity, that you have to send the material at least 1 week in advance, so that students have studied it, they've understood the material. And when you go online, the teaching should be more engaging, where you're not teaching the student, but a classroom of 10 students should be interacting, being able to exchange notes with each other, and it's easier to understand if they've understood what they're being taught. The interesting part was that the parent community was very excited in the villages that teaching is continuing and it's not impacting them, because with all the worries they had, the socio-economic impact which it had in the villages, our worry was, will the students be able to cope up with the kind of backgrounds they come from while they're at home, because there would be so much tension at home. But interestingly, the parent community did a lot to support the teaching, and I think what we've done is we focused on from March to now, and now our strategy is how do we work on various if the school opens in September or if it opens in December, so how do we work on different phases. So that's how we've been working. It's a lot of interesting learning. It's a lot there's a lot we need to do, because we also realized our children are depending on smartphones. These are very small devices, and so classrooms became smaller in teaching. So it's classroom with 2 minutes, 3 minutes break in between, small classroom size of 10, not beyond, and keeping the teachers motivated, keeping the students motivated. These are some learnings, and as we are going ahead, we are making sure that each step is really thought through. We are doing baby steps, because we know that we have children sitting as far as a remote village near China, and sitting as far as a remote village near Burma. And a lot of time, there's a huge electricity problem. These are not urban problems. These are very rural problems. So we are keeping the rural problems in mind and going ahead. I think it's being very well received by the students, and we are hoping for the best.
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing to continue learning despite all odds. It's just fantastic, and seeing that the parents and children are enthusiastic about it, actually going out, borrowing devices, you're moving to small groups to keep them engaged in all parts of the country. Absolutely fantastic, Pamela. Now moving on to Linda, I think in a country like ours where learning means examinations, and not having examinations means pretty much losing the academic session, the College Board has pretty much pulled out a miracle, running 4.4 million tests across over 120 countries. It's just phenomenal, the scale at which you've been able to do this. So go ahead, Linda. I see you're figuring out your screen share something. Over to you, Linda.
Mana, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes,
I am so sorry. I appear to be having some technical issues here, but let me figure out my screen share and let's get started here. Are you able to see my screen right now?
Yes, actually.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. So thank you, Manat, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today for this critically important topic on the transition to virtual learning in this COVID-19 era. So many of the educators out here that are joining us today probably know the College Board for our signature program, the SAT or SAT as it's known in India. But the College Board also has an instructional program called Advanced Placement or AP. An AP is a series of 38 rigorous university level courses that students are able to take while they are still in secondary school, typically in grades 11 and 12. And AP really is the gold standard for rigorous secondary school coursework in the US and in many parts of the world. As part of this program, not only do we provide curriculum and support to teachers, we also provide an annual end of course examination. And so in the mid-March timeframe, when all schools around the world were shutting down, we were really faced with a difficult decision to either continuing to offer the exams, deferring the exams, or canceling the exams for this year. None of these, in our opinion, were really acceptable choices, but at the moment, we thought those were the only choices that we have. The first two obviously are not really realistic. And the last one would really take away opportunities from really more than 3 million students globally
Linda,
to be able to.
Linda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but could you go into slideshow? I think it'll be easier for people to see.
Yes, give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Are you seeing that now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So as we were faced with, these decisions, as I said, the first two in terms of keeping the exam or deferring it and adjusting the schedule were really not great options for us. And as with each passing day, we felt like those are really not realistic options at all. And the third would take away an incredible opportunity for students, for 3 million students around the globe to be able to have their credentials for this year, a credential that they have been trying to work towards really, really diligently all year long. So we thought that, really these were not good options for us at all. So what did we decide to do? We wanted to understand from a student perspective whether or not they wanted to continue to take their exams this year, whether they felt like they were ready to take their exams this year. So we surveyed students, and overwhelmingly what they told us was that they wanted the opportunity to be able to take their AP exams this year. So much had already been taken away. They didn't want one more thing to be taken away from them this year. But understandably, students were very concerned about not being ready for their exams this year because of school closures. And, for us, hearing this feedback and 91% of students telling us this, we simply could not ignore this feedback. And so what we decided to do was twofold. So we very, very quickly worked on a two-pronged solution. The first is related to instruction, and the second is related to exams. And so let me talk about the instruction piece first here. Because of the potential gap in instruction as schools closed, some schools were able to, as you heard earlier from some of the school leaders here, some schools were able to very quickly and successfully transition into virtual instruction. Other schools were a little less successful with that, and we needed to keep in mind that across the more than 20,000 schools in which AP is given, there is a huge range there. So to address the instruction gap, within a 2-week period, we launched free online classes to allow AP instruction to continue during this disrupted period. These classes were taught by master AP teachers. We recruited the best AP teachers in the world to teach these courses. They were hosted on YouTube. They were offered live every single day for about a 6-week period, but these were also available on demand for students who could not tune in live or for teachers who wanted to be able to leverage these lessons in their virtual instruction separately. And the content focused on reviewing the first 75% of the course, and in a minute I'll tell you why it focused on that. But we also included lessons that were from the last 25% of the course, and the reason being that when schools closed in the right around the middle of March, most schools were able to get through about 75% of the curriculum, with 25% of the curriculum that they were trying to teach online or were not teaching at all. And so teachers could use these as supplements to their instruction, but we had designed them in a way where it wasn't dependent on students having separate virtual instruction available to them. So that was the first piece. The second piece is related to the at-home testing. And so as we thought, and this of course is really one of the bigger challenges that we had. And as we were thinking through the solution, there were a couple of key considerations here. One was access. Will all students be able to access the exams and be able to take these exams? Again, recognizing that all students had differential access to devices, to connectivity, to different home environments, etc. The second major piece is, of course, security. How can we ensure integrity in a at-home connected environment where students can Google anything, where they can talk to anybody through a laptop or mobile phone, anything? And then the last piece is acceptance. Will colleges and universities accept these scores? Will they use them in the same way as they have in the past in terms of recognizing this as a credential for students, either for admissions purposes or to grant placement and credit for students? So those were the key considerations, and we felt like we had to solve the problem for all of these, or solve it to an acceptable point in order to be able to move forward with this solution. So let me talk you through each one of these and what we decided to do. First, around access. As I mentioned earlier, students had differential access. We could not assume that everybody had devices. We could not assume that everybody had connectivity. So in terms of access, we felt like we could not continue to administer a 3-hour exam, which is 2.5 to 3 hours is the length of typical AP exams. This year they had to be shorter because we just did not know what the home environments were for students. So what we did was we designed 45-minute exams that we still felt like psychometrically were still valid, only covered content in the 75% of the course, knowing that school was disrupted for many students. And students could use a variety of different devices. That was important to us. And keeping in mind that, for some students that didn't really matter because they didn't have access to technology at all, we also worked with different service providers and tech companies to provide devices and wireless hotspots to underprivileged students, which, we coordinated distribution of that to students. And lastly, we had to be realistic and understand that some students were going to either have conflicts with the schedule or tech issues that we really just didn't know about, or other issues that we simply could not predict at the moment. So we had to offer multiple windows when students could take the exam. And for us, that meant having a primary testing window, a makeup window, and even this third exception testing window to be able to serve all students. So that was on the access front of things. With regards to security, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges here, how can we ensure integrity? And while I can't tell you everything, given the sensitivity of this particular topic, I can share a couple of things here. And I should note that these exams are unproctored. We simply did not have sufficient time in this constrained period to put in place a system that would allow for online proctoring, as well as comply with the strict privacy requirements that were in place, not only in the US, but really across the world. So we had to really think about this as an unproctored exam. So in terms of thinking about that, the things we had to solve for: the content. We could not use multiple choice questions, so we transitioned to only using free response questions that focus on higher order analytical skills where answers just could not be Googled. And so we leveraged our entire test development team very quickly to refocus all of the questions on that. And we've had these in prior exams as well. The only difference this year is that that's the only thing we focused on with this exam. Students had to take this simultaneously. Everybody had to take the exams at the same time. And on our end, we employed additional post-test analytics, technology like plagiarism check software. We use a software called Turnitin in order to check for plagiarism and to ensure that, you know, the materials students were submitting were truly their own. And of course, our own staff are monitoring social media to ensure, you know, students were not trying to get an unfair advantage. And to ensure that students don't have the incentive to cheat, we also set much more severe consequences this year, including reporting any cases to universities where students were sending their scores to and asking universities to deny admissions to those students if that were the case. And so, you know, so again, from a security standpoint, we felt comfortable with the solution that we put in place. Our experts felt comfortable. And then the last hurdle was around acceptance. It was important that more than 4,000 higher education institutions, which currently recognize and accept AP, continue to do so. And we consulted with numerous higher education leaders and confirmed that not only will they accept scores from this year's exam, but also knowing the crisis that we are in, they will also exercise flexibility for students and not disadvantage them in the event that they could not take this year's exams. So what was the result of all of this? Let me just share this with you very quickly. We thought this was a huge success, more successful than, in fact, we anticipated. Our AP Live classes were viewed 33 million times by 5.3 million unique viewers. We attracted so much attention that celebrities like Lin-Manuel Miranda from the play Hamilton, Melinda Gates, and Jeb Bush also signed on. And this is important because this really provided some additional encouragement and motivation to students at a time when they were already dealing with a lot of stress in their lives. Testing is still going on right now, but so far we've had 4.3 million exams started with about 93% of students who completed their exams. And in fact, this rate is higher than prior years when we had actually only 91% of students complete their exams. And some of the reasons here are that students are disrupted because of, you know, illness or power going out, or, you know, a host of different issues that could cause disruptions. These happen in other years as well. Or there are cases where students look at the questions and think that it's just too hard and they don't want to attempt it. But we're very pleased with the completion rate this year. And from a technology standpoint, we had less than 1% of students who had technical challenges with submitting their responses. But in the end, we felt, and that is a really small proportion, but in terms of absolute numbers, it also means tens of thousands of students having issues. So it was important to have makeup exams available. And in the end, the majority of students and teachers really agreed that we made the right decision for AP exams this year, despite the challenges. And now as we kind of look to the future, we are taking many of these lessons that we've learned through this experience as we, you know, think about how we support schools as they come back into session, knowing that virtual instruction in some blended format is likely going to stay for, you know, not only just the short term, but I think the long term. So we feel that our role is really trying to figure out how we augment and support schools in that way, but in no way replacing that. As was mentioned earlier, I don't think online can ever replace the richness of an in-person teaching and learning experience. As I am also struggling with e-learning with my own children, I really think that the human touch is absolutely critical to learning. From an assessment standpoint, we've learned a lot about how to administer digital exams, but also that, you know, the whole assessment model needs to change, thinking about assessments throughout the year, but also focusing on more higher order skills through project-based work. Because in a world where, you know, facts are just a Google search away, we really have to think differently about this. So let me end there and thank all of you for having me today and for joining us. And lastly, I really just want to commend all of you for your resilience in the middle of this crisis. It's such an honor to be among you today. Now, Manat, back to you.
Thank you so much, Linda. You know, really, with most of the examination boards across the globe giving up someone who had to manage 5 million exams keeps at it is absolutely fantastic. Gives us a lot of hope for the future. And what you say about assessments, and I think Vishnu spoke about it earlier, assessment is the biggest lever for change. And if we're compelled to change something because we don't have an option now, and that could bring about reforms that we've just been sitting on for a while, it could have a significant change. It could cause that change. It could precipitate that change. So really looking forward to that. Now, I have one question for the school fellows, Vishnu, Pamela, and Srivatsa. So to our viewers who are looking to devise an online, a virtual learning strategy, what are a couple of insights, or what is your advice to them? 2 or 3 things.
Who do you want to go first?
Srivats, go for it.
So I think 2 things. Context. Be very, very aware of your context. Don't try to copy somebody else doing well in another context. Don't be ashamed of your context. Do what is usable in your context. And secondly, communication. Communicate with stakeholders, parents, teachers, and communication has to be two-way. Things are too new for all of us. Many times we think we have all the answers. We simply don't. We need to communicate in a two-way manner with parents, with teachers in order to come to answers. So context and communication.
I can go next, Manit.
Go ahead.
So Manit, so fortunately and unfortunately, technology doesn't add, it only multiplies, which essentially means that if you have a great pedagogical practice, if you have a great culture, online learning will just amplify it. So there's a lot of possibilities. But if you don't have strong internal pedagogical practices, online learning is going to make it worse. Keep in mind, online learning for the first time has also brought in the parents into the class. And there is a public assessment of how teachers are doing. And that's going to happen in it. All the more reason why I would strongly urge school leaders to focus on the basics. Basics around how well is your curriculum articulated? Do you have simple learning objectives? Are your assessments very clear? Does it measure what it's supposed to measure? Do teachers do things which are basic? You can just classify them as 5 key pedagogical practices and just focus on those. And is every teacher in your community follows those 5 pedagogical practices to run an effective class? So my key suggestion would be focus on the basics, because technology will just amplify it for you.
For us, the focus is is similar to what you are saying, but a little different, because when we start working, we think of students think of a little girl sitting in a remote village in Ladakh, a 10-year-old girl sitting there, a little boy, 12-year-old in a remote village of Lakhimpur. So we have a student body like that. So for online materials which we create is of key importance. So for us, that is one area of the focus area. The other is the feedback we get from the students. So a regular communication with the students and a feedback on what they are understanding, what do they want to learn. For us, the finishing the syllabus is not important. How do we design the curriculum is more important, that every student is able to understand and learn from that. And third, keep the motivation of the teachers, the parents, and the students on a high, because this might go on for a while. So these are the 3 focus areas for us. As I said, we are doing baby steps, because for us we have children from a very different society.
Thank you so much, Pamela. One question to
Mana,
you.
I'm sorry, can I also add something to that? I know you asked the school folks, but I think one thing that we have found, which I think is important for this group, is think about collaboration. Think about how you can leverage technology to really bring the strengths of your teachers to bear. I think in the classroom, we ask teachers to do everything. But in this online environment, as kind of we learned through our AP Live courses, we could leverage the best teachers in the world to deliver to thousands of students, tens of thousands of students at one time. So think about which teachers have what strengths, how you can leverage that, and how they can all collaborate in order to really deliver very rich, meaningful experiences, leveraging their own strengths, but also learning from other teachers.
So, Linda, the one other question that I had for you is, I'm sure you all worked on figuring out unproctored exams and academic honesty. And one of the solutions, the difficult path that you took, was to just change the entire assessment, to move away from multiple choice, to ask questions that cannot be searched on Google. But if you were to move on the other end, I'm not sure schools in India would be able to do that just yet, given the diversity that we have. What is there hope there? Is there, in terms of the technology that you may have explored, possibilities for us to be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is a gradual process. To your point around, can we move so quickly to redesigning the way that we do assessments? I think that will take time to do. In terms of leveraging technology, there are numerous providers out there that provide online proctoring that schools can leverage at this point. In the US, one of the largest providers is ProctorU, and in some of our other assessments, we work with them as well, but that requires having a platform that could support that, and we simply just need more time if we were to go in that direction and do that. But those technologies are available, and we also try to use as much as we can things like plagiarism checks. I mentioned Turnitin is the provider that we use for their plagiarism software, and they've done a lot in terms of really perfecting that that technology. And then for us, again, I can't say too much here, but there's a lot of post-exam analytics that we can do as well in terms of looking at whether or not there are some abnormal patterns in terms of performance and behavior and things like that, that would also give you some clues in terms of whether or not anyone is gaining an unfair advantage.
Okay, I think we only have a couple of minutes to go. They've given us a 5-minute extension. And the one burning question that I have is, what could the new normal look like? And I'm not talking about 3 months from now or 6 months from now. What is the opportunity? What are the possibilities that we're looking at in 2 or 3 years? What could this disruption mean for us? What would schools look like? What would this whole universe of learning look like? And I know 8 years ago, I met this professor at Harvard who was saying that in times where you can learn when you want, where you want, with who you want, from whom you want, schools and colleges will have to adapt. It's just a matter of time. And yet that adaptation was slow. And now, is this going to accelerate some of those reforms? And what would those reforms look like? What would schools look like in some time?
So I'll go again. So I think one of the major points is that we have to look at the school day as a more flexible time, and we have to not view learning ending at 1:30 p.m. in India. We know that students consume video and better than text. So I think the asynchronous learning that we've learned is going to actually go on post-COVID as well. I think second thing very quickly is that we have learned that teachers have an amazing ability to adapt and learn. The kind of work that they've done over the past 3 months has been mind-boggling. And I think now we are going to set higher expectations for ourselves and for teachers and their ability to bring about change in themselves and the teaching learning pedagogies.
Thanks.
Manat, I will probably take, even at the risk of sounding very ambitious, but I'm going to take the risk of sharing what we are really thinking at the heritage schools. Many years back, we actually created a hybrid school, a prototype. And we went to the parents and said, hey, why do you want to do a traditional grade 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? Why don't we create personalized pathways for you? Why don't we have opportunities for students to work on their projects of interest, do internships, write research papers, work in a startup, and then get ready for college? If it's a matter of going to just finishing a grade 12, but at least give flexibility early on. But I think back then, parents are very excited. But when they had to really take the call to shift to a personalized curriculum, they wanted to take the easy path, the time and tested path. I think now parents are more open to experimenting what is relevant for their children. I think COVID has really forced the alternatives and possibilities. Today, many parents are saying, hey, I can just continue doing this, not just for the next 3 or 4 months, because they see some of their students really interested in doing things which they really care about. So my view is parents will be far more open to alternative models of deeper learning. And second thing, which is definitely will happen and has to happen, and I pray it happens in a country like ours, we relook at what assessment is, which is not just test and content-based assessment. One of the challenges you pose is how do you prevent plagiarism and copying? One, of course, there are technology solutions to it. Another is ask questions which you can't copy. That's an alternative way of doing it. The problem in India is much of the questions can be copied. But what if you design assessment which is difficult to actually copy? You really need to apply your mind to come up with your own unique answer, which has your own unique voice. So relooking an assessment is something which we should do. And I think COVID is a great blessing in disguise in that sense.
To us, the opportunity is, and it's actually very exciting to see how now through the online platform, we can get a lot of teaching happening in the rural parts of India. Right now, we were all very dependent on what is already existing. So it's so interesting thinking that, if you have, just by example, a Harvard teacher, faculty teaching somebody in a remote village of maybe Nagaland or Manipur or one of these areas. And, one of the challenges while we were at Vidyagyan, we realized was when our children wanted to be preparing for the competitive exams, each time we had to take them from very remote school locations to the city for training. And if you have this virtual world and opportunity, everything is accessed online. It's so much easier for the children of the rural world to so much learning and so much basic education. Also, if you turn and see a student of a class 1 is unable to read a book of a grade 5, unable to read a book of grade 1, all that would stop because you would have so many support systems happening. So we are very excited about getting online teaching to the real world, which is the rural India.
Yeah.
And then, Manat, I would just add that, what I said earlier, I think technology is going to continue to play a huge role, but I think we will also begin to really appreciate the human touch as well, and to figure out, where it is critical for teachers to have a role and leverage technology really, really effectively. And then the second thing I think is that, this COVID crisis and online learning environment is really going to shine a light on what's important for us to teach children, what is really worth learning. Because in a captive school environment, you can go through this and kids have no choice but to pay attention to you. But in an online environment, it's so easy to ignore things that are viewed as, why is that important? And so more engaging activities, really thinking about personalizing learning, as Vishnu had shared, is going to be absolutely critical, I think, in the next couple of years.
Okay, I'm checking from Ali if I haven't heard the bell. If I haven't, I can really go on.
Unfortunately, we are out of time.
We are out of time.
Although
Okay.
This is endlessly fascinating, but we are out of time. So
there are several questions that are parked.
Yes,
I would only request the audience who've been extremely patient, if they could post these questions on the social media, or what we'll try to do is put answers in comments. I'll send the questions to the panelists, and they'll place the question and then the answer on the YouTube channel where this is displayed.
Yeah.
Ali, could you help with what
Yes, we can
look for the YouTube channel? If you could put it on the chat, it would be
actually, they just need to go to the Ashoka University YouTube channel. Both the tracks are live there as well, so they can put in questions.
So we're in strange times. Depressing at many levels have been perhaps the most demanding time for educators, because unlike other people working from home, their life hasn't been really flexible. They've had to work even harder. And schools have probably, school managements, leaders, boards have all been more stressed than they have ever been, and they've really stretched themselves to rise to the challenge. I think over and above that, the opportunity, the potential for change, the excitement that this can create, the disruption this can create could be really extraordinary. Just like many of us are saying that this is a wake-up call when it comes to Mother Nature. This is also a wake-up call when it comes to education. We really need to change our ways, and we've gone too slow in our reforms. And this is opening up some opportunities that we cannot let go. We must harness. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Shrivas, Pamela, Linda, and Vishnu, and Ali for having us all here. It was wonderful chatting with all of you. And I'm sorry we could not take the questions. This was designed more for exemplar schools to share their presentations. So we'll come back to you on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. I will just wind up for the audience. I think all of you may go on to your other pursuits. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Manit, for a wonderful session. That brings us to the end of day one of the conference on the future of schools, overcoming the COVID-19 challenge and beyond. We've traveled some distance in our understanding of the issues and possible solutions, a set of absolutely fantastic keynote sessions and panel discussions. A word of thanks to our presenters, to our moderators, and to our panelists for guiding us on this journey. A big word of thanks to our partners, Harvard Business School India Research Center, Khan Academy, IC3 Movement, FICCI Arise, College Board, TIC, Exceed, and Center for their support. Just a reminder, the conference will resume tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. and we have a great set of sessions lined up for you. The first keynote session is called Future of Education, and we are very fortunate to have Mr. Salman Khan, who is actually the founder of online education in a sense, with us. Mr. Khan will be speaking with us from California. You can see that there are many other sessions on your screen. At 11:30 a.m., Mr. Nandan Nilekani. At 1:45 p.m., Mr. Deepak Parekh. At 3:45 p.m., Mr. Manoj Ahuja, Chairman CBSE. And at 4:35 p.m., Ms. Bridget Long from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. With that, we will take your leave. Thank you very much for attending the conference today. If you're going to go out, please remember to wear your masks. And after you come back, please remember to wash your hands thoroughly. See you tomorrow morning at 9:30. Just one word of caution. We had a bit of a problem today because many people were taking time to log in. So we hope not to have it again, but let's see what tomorrow brings. We are trying our best to sort that out. Thank you and good night.